Good evening, everybody. I am very sorry about starting pretty much at the end of my streaming window. I can assure you that I'm going to be the one paying the penalty when I try and get everything done tonight. But let's not focus on that. Let's jump into the game. Now, there was some news about Book of Hours that I wanted to share. Let's bring up the nice music first, though. So let me just see what's going on here. I also forgot to check and see if the YouTube stuff was working. So, okay, good. YouTube is working. We're tagged up appropriately. And again, my apologies for the late start. My usual deal is I want to try and start anywhere between 7 and 8 Eastern time. I have been trying really hard to be a bit more disciplined in terms of things like, well, like one is bedtimes, but one of the big ones for me lately has been food. Because especially with streaming, and especially when streaming and holding down sort of a day job, it's very easy to order in Uber Eats, and like the fees alone are ruinous. But on top of that, it's just like not a really great way to live. So what I've been trying to do lately is just, if I am running behind, the problem was in the earlier stage, and the answer is not to sort of take a shortcut on dinner. And I did sort of break. Actually, what was very telling about this was, for the most part, this has worked very well. And I did cheat once and ordered something in, and I actually found that it was the first time that I blew a hole in sort of a small budget that I made for myself, which is fine. I mean, those contingencies are so you can do fun stuff, and like sometimes, eating garbage is the fun thing to do. But that is a really good way to sort of quantify in very specific terms what a particular quote unquote convenience is costing you. So with that in mind, that's just a long way of saying that I decided to force myself to do a proper dinner. I did, and that means that I'm starting late. And the answer for that in future will be to make sure that I just give myself a bit more time to get dinner taken care of. All right. What might be slightly more interesting for everyone, I'm just going to take a second here to bring up the Weather Factory blog. So there's been an advent calendar, and you know what? Probably the best thing for me to do here is just share that. So here is the Weather Factory advent calendar. We'll zoom things in a little bit. This was put out Advent Calendar 2023, posted by Lottie Bevan. We are trying something new this year. Book of Hours seems like such an obvious fit for this. So starting from today, we're running a 25-day Advent Calendar of Hush House. Of course, my hope is that we will still see a King Crucible Yule log. But and what is nice? Actually, I'll let the entry speak for itself. But I think this is a really lovely idea, and apparently this does actually come from the fact that Lottie, at least, is a very big Christmas fan. And I'll confess, this is something that I can share with Weather Factory. I don't particularly care for the winter season where I live. Usually after Christmas, it's a bit more of a dilemma, but there is something very nice about Christmas that even if I'm in a place where the climate isn't so great, it is a very nice season. I've very often liked giving gifts, although I have fewer people to give gifts for the last little while. But I don't know, it's something very nice, and so I am obviously completely captured by Weather Factory and really like their stuff, but the fact that they're doing this advent calendar is just a nice little cherry on top. So Each day we will open a door containing treats in Book of Hours or the real world. You'll see it on all of our socials, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and we'll update this blog daily with what's behind today's door. Most are tasty amuse-bouche. Some are pretty major reveals. A few real-world treats will only last for 24 hours, but you will never miss anything in-game. Playing Book of Hours anytime in December will give you everything the calendar's revealed up to date whenever in-game winter rolls around, so there is no stress if you're out having fun with friends. Except, have a think about your life choices there. So, door number 1, seasonal art in Book of Hours. The next time you're playing Book of Hours and winter comes around, you'll notice some festive cheer sprinkled throughout Brankrug Village and Hush House. For everybody who wants to be left alone, like the weary detective in his Illustrated London News, there is an option to turn off seasonal art in the settings menu. For everyone else, take careful note of Reverend Timothy's Christmas tree next to the rectory. Door number 2, something smooth as an egg and frosted like a winter window. Collect today's gift in-game from Reverend Timothy's Christmas tree. Door number 3, 24% off the Lady Afterwards for 24 hours. Now, of course, this was quite a bit earlier, but both the boxed and digital editions of The Lady Afterwards are 24% off for 24 hours. Seek the occult in 1920s Alexandria and a luxury Call of Cthulhu-esque TRPG based in the world of Cultist Simulator. So I do imagine here that the real benefit to this thing is the physical edition. There's something about sort of gathering the whole package together and doing the things. But obviously it's nice that there is an option so that people who are not necessarily going to be so I'm not a big tabletop gamer. In the end, tabletop gaming is discrimination against the lonely. So for me, there is a reasonable question as to whether or not sort of a physical product is the right call here. But I do think that this is a really interesting idea, and I'm actually really happy that there seems to be quite an appetite for these kinds of experiences. Door number 4, something fiendishly simple and wretchedly fragile. Collect today's gift in-game from Reverend Timothy's Christmas tree, so Dear Day Lens. Door number 5. Now this, of course, assumes that you are a Reddit user. I don't use Reddit too much. I've tried to use it a little bit more, actually specifically because of the Weather Factory stuff. But I do know there are quite a few active Reddit users here. So this was new Reddit user flares. By popular demand, we've added Book of Hours specific user flares for the subreddit. Mark yourself as your favorite starting character from the archaeologist to the twiceborn. So if this is the full list here: Simmergist, Twiceborn, Archaeologist, Artist, Executioner, Magnate, Prodigal, Revolutionary, and Cartographer, along with whatever was in there before. Door number 6, something hard for mortal men to dig. So I believe this is Molly. Door number 7. Now this was a really interesting one, and I am wondering if this is a replacement for a project or a metamorphosis of a previous project. So this is something that has been worked on for a while and does actually have a kind of a... It does have a role to play in Book of Hours. But in this case, door number 7, new coloring book. This is another item that people have been asking about for a while. We're launching a tarot-based adult coloring book in 2024 featuring the stained glass tarot art from the Lucid Tarot. So I don't know if this is what the final project is for the Lucid Tarot, or if there will also be a physical edition for the cards or not, but this was the announcement on the 7th. How are you doing, Olaf? And Nearly Logical, good to see you as well. Olaf, I am rather sorry for the late start. I wanted to make sure that I got my dinner, but I do know you are one of the people who is most affected by that. So I hope you are well. I'd better be sorry. I am sorry. I just keep making the same mistake over and over again, though, so it sounds very insincere. But anyways, I have, I'm not exactly an adult coloring book kind of guy, but I do actually have a lot of Weather Factory merch, and I could see myself having some fun with this. So, But more importantly, and again, this is one big thing for me. I can actually imagine even more so that this would be a really good gift for a few people that I know. And because I mentioned, one thing that I like about this in the Christmas context, even though, this will be coming out in 2024, I kind of liked this because the first thought that I had was not whether or not I would color inside of this, but I actually thought this would make a really, really good gift because I know some people who would like this. And it's also the type of gift, particularly for some people who are not Secret Histories fans, it would be so obviously only a gift that I could give them. So I may, depending on the price, I don't want to, I don't want to spend like $200 to, I don't think this is going to be a $200 coloring book, but obviously there is a limit to any gift that you give. That would have to be a really good friend. But anyways, this was one that, in terms of $1 million coloring book, exactly one of a kind. This was probably the first physical item that really caught my attention. Door number 8, the reason why we named the stream the way that we did on Friday, something salty and savory, the ham. On the 9th, 24% off the Tarot of the Hours for 24 hours. Now, again, we're at the end of that 24-hour period. Our best-selling item, the Tarot of the Hours, is 24% off for 24 hours. Door number 10, something healthful and slippery. Collect today's gift in-game from Reverend Timothy's Christmas tree. And this is the big one. Door number 11, only twins drown twice. Europe, 1937. The war in the world is coming, and worse yet, the war in the sun. In this gathering gloom, the notables of the occult underworld consider new weapons, new alliances, new paths. Who can they turn to for help, if not the librarian of Hush House? Explore visitors and their stories in much greater depth. Host exotic feasts and sophisticated soirees. And in your own quiet way, shape the genesis of the controversial Lighthouse Institute. The House of Light content expansion comes to Book of Hours next year. So they have now announced what the first DLC is going to be. It is not news to anyone that this has actually been something that they have been working on for a while. But the first DLC for Book of Hours was announced today. It has a title, House of Light. And it is certainly an interesting topic, but there are a couple of other features of this which makes this is something I am very, very much looking forward to. Let me just see if I can get any more. The tweet for this says, only twins drown twice, a major reveal. House of Light will be Book of Hours' first content expansion coming 2024. Unravel visitors' pasts, host exotic feasts and sophisticated soirees, and in your own, quiet way, shape the genesis of the controversial Lighthouse Institute. And I think that's it. A bunch of people in the comments talking about how visitors need the biggest rework. And I'm like, be nice. The visitors are fine, but I am looking forward to seeing what they do. So yeah, this was definitely a big day in terms of Book of Hours news, and I wanted, even though it takes a while to get started, this is sorry to say nearly logical. It's a 24-hour window for that stuff. I don't know if they're going to do anything for Boxing Day or anything like that, but it's I'm assuming you're already following the Twitter account, but that's probably the best place to find out about that stuff. Books are the memory which does not die, inscribed in 5 languages over the gate of Hush House. All right. So, I was recording some YouTube videos. Let's find the stream. You don't Twitter, you find that it's better. Nope, that's a completely fair point of view. I probably shouldn't. I am actually, I'm not ashamed to admit I don't know really anything about tarot, but I do like the art in Book of Hours. So I did actually wind up picking up. I did actually wind up picking up the Tarot of the Hours a million years ago. Okay. Oh, sorry. There is one other thing that I need to get. I will be back momentarily. I call it Twitter. I'm Sears towering the whole thing. Mostly, I know the. Okay, so this is one of these things that I think most people would be happy not to hear more about. I am not crazy about the annoying car guy, as I'm pretty sure most people would figure out because I call him the annoying car guy. I will grant. So, like, okay, here's the thing. Like, there's no benefit to, like, defending the indefensible. But I will say, I am of two minds of the current state of the site. So, as a free user who has no intention of paying for any of the features, I would say that the quality of the site has declined. And this is both in the sense of, just stuff doesn't work as well as it used to. Like, the number of times that I will click on something and get an error, that has increased a lot. And this is just a really good example of sort of what happens when you do a very large cull of the workforce without necessarily thinking about what the consequences of that might be. But the thing is that beyond whatever, ad revenue, like, I'm not somebody whose posts get viewed very often or tweets get viewed very often. I'm not really so I wasn't driving people to the site, and it's not like I was paying for the subscription service or I was clicking on a lot of ads. So, my value as a consumer of ads wasn't there. So in the end, I'm just not worth that much to the site. Not that I feel that I need to. Let's be clear on that. So the reason why I point that out, though, is that you do have a lot of people, and these are largely, people who have kind of supported the current owner throughout his career, right? Like, there is something to be said about this guy's ability to raise money largely because of the reputation that he has. And obviously that reputation has taken a dent as a result of the rather foolish acquisition, or at least foolish to our perspective here. But what I will say is that the transformation of that site has largely been invisible to anybody who doesn't pay for it. There are actually quite a few features being added. So in this idea of creating an everything app, I am skeptical about it, right? I am, I'm not exactly on team annoying car guy. But what I will say is that I'm also not really in a position to be particularly smug about, the state of the site or what's going on. For all I know, it is actually a very useful product, or is being turned into a very useful product in this guy's portfolio. Because, you have a corpus on which you can sort of train, whatever his competing AI for, OpenAI will be. Although I will also note that I think XAI has not been very successful at raising a lot of money right now, and I suspect that is probably due to the tarnished business reputation as a result of the acquisition. But again, like, the number of things that are being done on that site are things that I can't see because I'm not paying for it. And in the end, if there is some big turnaround happening, what would likely be true is that the turnaround will have already occurred by the time, somebody like me observes it, because again, I'm not paying for the site, and I very likely will never pay for that site. So, as with anything, right? Like, I'm not trying to do some kind of a contrarian take. I'm not trying to say, oh, here's the nicer side of it. As far as I can tell, this was a very foolish set of statements and priorities. Coming back to bite someone in the backside. This will probably be a very large loss for the current owner. And I am not really in a position to say whether or not any of these bets on the future prospects will turn out. But I also kind of have to be honest with myself to say I'm not entirely sure I'm in a position where I would be able to fairly evaluate whether or not the plan is turning out. So that's kind of where I sit on this stuff. If he's fine with people being dead named, they're gonna keep. Yeah, like that's the big thing, right? Like, this guy clearly does not care about getting rid of users like me. Yeah, exactly. Like, I personally cannot see this thing being a replacement for my bank. I don't know what the value proposition is. There are like fintech companies in Canada that are more likely to replace my bank account. But like I said, I am also almost certainly, it's kind of like me talking about how, talking about a change made to the Ford Focus, right? Oh God, why would they do that to the Ford Focus? I'll never buy one now. And it's like, well, I was never going to buy a Ford Focus in the first place. So, doesn't mean that I can't talk about this stuff. But, I kind of accept that, I'm not really going to be in a position to say whether or not the Ford Focus is doing its thing properly or not. So yeah, I mean, like, again, I don't want to give the deliberately contrarian take. I don't want to try and sort of convince everyone that this is actually 8-dimensional chess that's being played. The read is that as far as the advertising business is concerned, that is just completely imploding. But I don't necessarily think that it's news that part of the plan for the whatever the future of that app would be a kind of a platform that was less reliant on advertising anyway. So, whether that is the plan working as intended, or whether it's just, an example of, incredibly foolish decision making and somebody losing a lot of money as a result of running their mouth, like, I'm not really in a position to say it. I'm happy enough to say certainly doesn't look like it's going well, and I don't have a problem saying that. But as always, it in my view, it never hurts to take a minute and just sort of think, well, what are the conditions under which you would what are the conditions under which you would know that you were wrong? And in my case, like, I just really can't think of a situation. If there was a big turnaround happening at Twitter, I'm actually not sure how I would learn about it other than the popular press. And the popular press obviously is, they kind of have a stake now in terms of how they're going to report on this stuff. Anyways, there are far more interesting topics to talk about. So we are going to be checking out the affair of the particular Mystique. We have had Serena Blackwood, Corso, Arthur Moore. Sorry, Arthur Moore. Oh, any relation? I never even noticed that there were two Moores. I wonder if it's Yvette Southey who visits next. I think she's somebody who looks at lanterny things. I guess we'll find out later. And yeah, so as the title suggests, I'm probably going to spend some time examining the Cucurbit. I think we went over this. Basically, everything gets destroyed except for Valentine's Memorial, and then it was Levinson, was it? One of the librarians paid for the memorial and then ultimately never got to see it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of treat it like I was walking through. So we're going to go through here. We're going to go to the kitchen. We're going to go down to the oubliette. I don't think there's anything for me to investigate here. But basically, I'm going to take care of these rooms because I don't think there's a whole lot for me to investigate. And then, we're going to get to the real substance as we sort of go through the cells and up to the condignator and such. But what else do I have to do for the day? I guess there's no real books for me to read until we learn new languages. I can always make some money. I could offer help with correspondence and arithmetic. There's no school in Brandkrug, and not everyone here knows their letters. So I needed to reset my my plans just from the YouTube series. Oh yes, I should also think about the books that I've been reading. So I think we read up to the Book of Dissolution, but we didn't read the Book of Dissolution. So let's work with that. Okay, that is in Deep Mandaic. Onto in the Mallory. I'm going to keep my health so that we can interact with the bees. We've got Natan's desk. We can use the tryst with that unless I want to try and get some mackerel. Count of Kanish get the spider's door. That's Frisian, so we're in a good spot for reading that. Book of the Centipede. The manner in which the alchemist was spared, so that is a VAC text. And unfortunately, we don't have the VAC available for On the Matter and Deeds of Serpents. But as you can see, we got quite a bit on our list. So I'm happy to set that aside. And then from there, we're on to sort of our last section of the library. So let's get to work. Don't really have any need to talk with one of the people in town. It's always nice to just have the companionship, but right now, because I've been busy focusing on the determinations and the histories, I've sort of locked myself in Hush House, taking the occasional visitor, but not necessarily being as social, except for the occasional trip to the Sweet Bones to make a little bit or to have dinner. So I'm curious, how many people in chat, we talked about the Lighthouse Institute as part of the new DLC. Is anybody here familiar with the Lighthouse Institute? Zachary Wakefield. All right, the affair of the particular mystique. The Suppression Bureau has a growing interest in the field. Sorry, let's try that again. The Suppression Bureau has a growing interest in the recent fad for unconventional, often prophetic religious movements. No laws have been broken. Nothing sinister has come to light. All these movements are comfortingly solar in nature, but there does seem to be something going on. Mr. Zachary Wakefield, marksman, detective, renegade. He has always been a quiet man, but since he left the Suppression Bureau, he has grown even quieter and terribly still, except for his fingers and for his eyes, always restless in motion. So he understands Frisian. Oh, sorry, it was Aramaic was the language I was talking about before. This is Frisian. So he understands Frisian, Greek, Latin, and Kilisimi. Presumably he will be working with Winter in this case. So we need to find a Winter 5 text. There will be a new DLC, Ham Switch. So it was just announced today. No release date other than 2024. But the official name for it is House of Light. And I should actually probably just bring the blog up so that I can cite it. So the description on the website is probably the most comprehensive. Let me bring that up. Only twins drowned twice. Europe, 1937. The war in the world is coming, and worse yet, the war in the sun. In this gathering gloom, the notables of the occult underworld consider new weapons, new alliances, new paths. Who can they turn to for help, if not the librarian of Hush House? Explore visitors and their stories in much greater depth, host exotic feasts and sophisticated soirees, and, in your own quiet way, shape the genesis of the controversial Lighthouse Institute. The House of Light content expansion comes to Book of Hours next year. So for those of you that bought in that initial week, that will be something that is part of the... That's something that's part of the Perpetual Edition. So that's something that you will get as part of your early adoption of the game. Oh, I just saw something interesting. Okay, cool. And then I don't think there's any pricing information yet, but I'm sure they will announce that on time. Sorry, I wanted to take a look at the store page for Book of Hours. Cool. Okay. But yeah, so the DLC was just announced today as part of the Advent calendar. I have a suspicion about at least one of the releases for the Advent calendar, but the thing is that it's probably not good for me to speculate, and it's just fun for us to enjoy these things when they come up. So Tuppence will buy me a hearty meal in a quiet place where I can rest and gather my thoughts. It is summer. I am sitting on the bench outside the Sweet Bones, eating crumbly cheese in nettle wrappings and good black rye bread, soaking up the sun. Okay, let's have a chat with Wakefield about the affair, the particular mystique. If I wanted, I could try and learn a language, but he just doesn't know anything that, that I need. So everyone's always looking. Try. How do you do, Lord Gloom? That is quite an entrance. How are you tonight? Thank you very much for your subscription. Certainly not quite the... It is a bit of an instant. I think if I changed it, that might upset people. But yes, that's very, very kind of you. Thank you very much. Now, I need to apologize because I am trying to remember what you were streaming when... Cobalt Core, thank you. Because I hosted somebody for a game related to Book of Hours, and it's like, I don't think Lord Gloom was doing Book of Hours, and then I was like, so why am I associating him with Book of Hours? It's another card-based game. I am so sorry, but yes, it is always nice. It is always nice to shout out some people. A lot of you will know that I am very, very fond of Brace Yourself games, and of course they branched out into publishing with Godless, with Super Raft Boat together and with Cobalt Core, and I'm really split between Godless and Cobalt Core in terms of their releases. But it's been a wonderful opportunity to get in touch with just different people in terms of, people who maybe I wouldn't have normally seen with these different games. And Lord Gloom, actually, so thank you for the reminder, because now it's all coming back. Lord Gloom is somebody who you will want to watch if you actually want to see how that game is properly played. Because I know last time we played, it was it's a bit of a clown show on my part, but that's part of the fun, right? You don't play roguelikes so that you can win all the time. But it was a lot of fun to hang out there. I think I learned a thing or two about Cobalt Core, but most of all, it's actually just really nice to be able to hang out with people who, you feel some kind of common cause with. And of course, I suppose I should also say I feel obligated to say nice things about Lord Gloom's channel because they did just subscribe. But this is actually all stuff I would have said anyway. So somebody you can check out. Hopefully, if you aren't following them already, you can check them out. And for those of you wondering where the hell Cobalt Core is, that is going to be coming on Wednesday. So, but maybe don't watch me don't watch me after you've watched Lord Gloom. If it's the two of us streaming, you're gonna want to visit over there. But I'm actually delighted to hear that you are interested in Book of Hours. I think you mentioned that on your stream as well. But I'm a big fan of Cultist Simulator, and Book of Hours sort of fulfilled every possible expectation I could have had for it. It has absolutely no relation whatsoever to the kind of card-based roguelike of Cobalt Core, but my God, it's a good game. Now, I will maybe just caution you, I don't intend to do anything sort of quote-unquote spoilerish just for the sake of it, but I am actually quite far in the game. So if you don't know anything about it, you actually unlock each and every room of the house. And, there's a reason I'm not zooming in close on all of this stuff. So I am reasonably far in the game, but that I figure is kind of a double-edged sword. In one sense, if you have any questions about it, and that goes for anyone, I'm very happy to answer them. And like I said, I don't plan on shying away from gameplay, but right now I'm reading books and I'm looking at specific items. So the idea of making progress in the sense of getting to an ending, that's going to be on the back seat for a little while. But on the other hand, if you're someone who absolutely has to go in with zero information about the game, I wanted to sort of be upfront about that right at the very start. How are you doing, Digi Inferno? Okay, everyone's always looking. So in 1 second, we'll have to find a book for Zachary Wakefield. Fair. Well, what I normally do is if I feel like I'm getting into something that is a big, like, game-shaping secret, I'll handle it. But the fact of the matter is, I'm first of all playing as the Twiceborn, so that's one of many starts in the game. And if you're not familiar with Weather Factory's games, a lot of what is in this game is sort of communicated in little fragments. So even if I were to show you something, of profound significance. So I'm going to show you a room I really like in this game. I really like this room. I think it's very cool. I also happen to like the solar hours. Are these the solar hours? I have no idea. Maybe these are the solar hours. Maybe this cat is a solar hour. Like, if you don't know what any of these things are, it's really hard to be spoiled. But no, the big trick on this is that because it sort of doles out its information in sort of these little fragments, it's actually a game that's a little bit safer in terms of just talking about things, because a very large part of it is sort of piecing things together. But if I do feel like I'm getting to a point where I'm going to be talking about something specific to an ending that I'm pursuing, I usually tend to flag those for people. So a lot of this might as well be French to me since you haven't yet played Cultist Simulator. Yeah, no, there's a very specific reason why I use those terms. I'm not the sort of jerk that's going to run around and just say it's like, oh yeah, this is like the most major reveal in the game, and I just threw it out there. So. But yeah, all of that is a very long way of saying if you have any questions about the game, even just what it feels like to play it, let me know. But I will say that it's an exciting day today because Weather Factory did announce the first bit of expansion content, and it is related to a subject I'm quite interested in the form of the Lighthouse Institute. All right, the Book of Dissolution. Alexander Probst recovered a copy of this work from a mountain temple in Persia. Other copies surface now and then, usually seared on rock. The book consists mostly of prayers to the unburnt god, the Forge of Days, which consumes and transforms. It suggests the Forge's power arises partly from its nature and partly from its tools. The book describes an earlier House of the Sun, whose doors and ways were different. It praises the Forge of Days for opening the ways into the house and for transforming that which was to that which is, despite the screams of stone. And of course, we've heard a little bit about revenge from the gods from stone, so we'll just put that safely back on the shelf. We're not going to talk about what happened to the gods from stone. In the Mallory, a lively account of the creation of each jewel at the world's beginning. Now, it is worth mentioning, too, that the Mallory is a location in the House of the Sun, so I'm curious whether or not we'll see anything about that, because that would sort of argue that maybe I should be putting it up in the part of the library that I've established here. This was supposed to be temporary, but maybe we'll just keep the books there, because it looks nice. Lively, yes, but also almost entirely nonsense. Pearl, the tears of the forgotten moon, caught by the lionsmith in his net. Ruby, the blood of the first bird, stung by the lionsmith's hammer. The author is either terribly misinformed of the nature of the hours, or, one begins to suspect, intentionally throwing up a smokescreen to confuse seekers of the invisible arts. But there are some useful crumbs of fact to be picked out of the daft and gaping cracks. Actually, here's one. For those of you who are familiar with the sort of the lore of this world, and if anybody wants a primer on these things, I'm happy to share. But for those of you who are invested in Edge and the battle between the Colonel and the Lionsmith, as personified by the disciplines of the Scar and disciplines of the Hammer, does anybody have a preference between the Lionsmith or the Colonel? And if so, why did you choose what you choose? The Victory of Crowns, erratic accounts by Aaron on the hunting and consumption of supposed immortals by shadowy assassins, published in the late 19th century. The assassins are, according to Aaron, the agents of a power called the Coronel, a soldier of the secret masters. The accounts date back to Roman times. Aaron's scholarship is dubious, but she writes pithily. Incidents of sudden and violent death are interspersed with aphorisms. Hours don't dream, long try not to. So we will actually be seeing a long in the prison before too long. Sorry. Before we wait. You choose the Lionsmith because he makes big cats. I mean, that I do like cats, but I'm definitely on the Colonel's side here. No edge and no forge for the pet cat. So, the account of Kanishk at the Spider's Door. Loch Cowley, Kanishk's victim and lover, wrote this account, perhaps posthumously. Kanishk sought to become a name. In pursuit of that end, he made Loch Cowley the vessel of his appetites, promising Loch that they would ascend together. At the Spider's Door, he betrayed his lover. The Chiliarch listened to it happen and then forced Kanishk into his service. The Chiliarch cannot be denied. Loch Cowley remained to write this work and to describe the outer magics of struggle and contest. So we're not really doing anything with these memories, but what we're largely looking for right now, I've stopped writing down all of the details and lore snippets from the different books because I'd be writing all stream, and in some cases that might be something that people would be happy to watch, but I also think that would be alienating to a lot of people. So if I get a recipe, I tend to write it down so I can follow up on it later. And if it's just sort of information, what I sometimes do is if I think it's pertinent to something that we've been talking about recently, I'll sort of unpack a little bit. But if it's more just sort of, just a fun detail, if it's something that maybe I just want to have rattling around in the back of my head, those are the things that I just sort of leave and we move on to the next book. The Book of the Centipede. In the mid-1860s, one Madame Yi presented an entertainment based, she claimed, on this book. The centipede always found her way into the dark places. When she was punished for it, she reacted badly, in the Mansis as in Maya. The river runs through the sands out of myth and into legend. The painted river runs the other way. One is barred to the centipede now, but she finds ways back in sometimes. So one thing I will maybe talk about here, just for the benefit, because a lot of these have actually dealt specifically with a number of the hours, and they're particularly obscure references. What I might do is give a broad description about some of the things we're talking about, just for the benefit of a common understanding. And I figure it never really hurts to go into a few of these details here, because I am not an expert, but I at the very least have sort of a broader understanding of what at least some of the specialized terms mean. So I will just read the manner in which the alchemist was spared, and then we can talk a little bit about some of the concepts that'll help bring people up to speed. The manner in which the alchemist was spared. In 1782, Émile Verdier used this text as the basis for a presentation to the Academy of Sciences in Paris. He was executed in secret the following morning without trial. In the days of the Carapace Cross, when humanity lived in the dark and ate on its knees, humans could enter the Mansis like vermin. One learnt the arts of flint, the arts of shaping and remaking. Through the black, the yellow, the red, the unwise mortal ascended to the shadow of the egg unhatching, and remained in his service. He may be there to this day. So it is kind of interesting here when it says the black, the yellow, and the red. These are very close to the flowers of the Watchman's Tree, but it would actually be black, white, and red. So this is also kind of interesting because between Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours, there have been potentially new principles added in, or at the very least things that act like principles. And so because we know there's been a change, at least in terms of things that act like principles in the game, it does allow for the possibility that perhaps the flowers also change as well, that something might have been yellow and then it was turned into white, or it could be something entirely different. We need to spend some time to unpack what these mean. But before I do that, let's try and bring some people up to speed, at least in terms of what's going on in the game. So first of all, let's talk about who I am. The Twiceborn. I remember that I once walked the House of the Sun as a bodiless immortal, but there was a matter that could only be resolved if I returned to flesh. Now if I go back to the House of the Sun, I will be hunted and punished. If I stay in flesh, I will be hunted and devoured. I need a third choice. To remain at Hush House as librarian would be one such choice, but there might be something more. So, and then I am the Twiceborn librarian of Hush House, and this is the journal in which I keep my remaining memories. The Twiceborn's third choice might be life as the librarian, or it might be something more radical, but you can complete the game by recording any history. You might wish to begin your studies with the Illumination Wisdom. So, the House of the Sun is something that if you have played Cultist Simulator, you have been to. That's the Mansis. But if this game does not require you to play Cultist Simulator, and if you want to find out what the House of the Sun is, you actually see a painting of the Mansis. And in the description it says, there have been many attempts to depict the House of the Sun. This, by the visionary painter, known only as the Magyar, is the best known. It's signed and dated. If it really is the original, it must count as one of the great treasures of the house. So the reason why I like pointing out this one is just this is the nice connection that you can make, because there is no way to go to the Mansis as far as I can tell in Book of Hours, and yet that's a very important location in Cultist Simulator. And so one might imagine, well, with so many references to the Mansis and so many of the books which are shared between the two games, do you have to play Cultist Simulator in order to understand Book of Hours? And the answer to that is no, but your understanding of things will very likely be different. As one might expect, right? If you're a practitioner of these, these arts, as opposed to somebody who is about recording and cataloging the information. So that's just a bit of an example in terms of how the game can sort of fold things together. I do think you get more out of everything if you play, all of the various products. But it's not like, you have to buy our other games to understand what's going on. So the basics that I can sort of say, that there is a sort of secret world that lies just underneath the skin of our own. The world is governed by various principles. So in these cases, you've got heart. The heart relentless beats to protect the skin of the world we understand. The heart is the principle that continues and preserves. You have lantern. Life is a pure flame, and we live by an invisible sun within us. Thomas Brown. Lantern is the principle of the secret place, sometimes called the house of the sun, and of the light above it. It is obviously the best principle. There is winter. Winter is the principle of silence, of endings, and of those things that are not quite dead. We already covered heart. There is grail as well, although it's not one I can read here. So hunger, lust, the drowning waters. The principle of the grail honors both the birth and the feast. We have moth. I knew a man who captured moths in a bell jar. On nights like this, he would release them one by one to die in the candle. Moth is the wild and perilous principle of chaos and yearning. We have edge. All conquest occurs at the edge. One who dwells there is blind and cannot be wounded. Another is strong and grows stronger. Edge is the principle of battle and struggle. I don't believe we did knock yet, so knock is the principle called knock, permits no seal and no isolation. It thrusts us gleefully out of the safety of ignorance. Knock opens doors and unseams barriers. I believe we've not done forge yet. Fire, I once read, is the winter that warms and the spring that consumes. The principle of forge transforms and destroys. So let me just see if I can... So we did heart, we did forge, edge, winter, lantern, knock, moth, grail. I think that's it. So I was talking about things that are like principles. So you'll notice that when you see these, the square text, it says principle of the secret place. And then if we do moth, the perilous principle of chaos and yearning. Now we can take a look at sky. Wind, storm, echo, song, the intricacies of mathematics and the principles of flight. Law's touch is lighter than we sometimes think. Matters of balance, harmony, and necessity. Nectar. The green wealth in the world's veins, the pulse of the seasons. Long ago, some called this principle blood. Oh, actually, this one is actually referred to as a principle. Moon, secrets are soft, night is softer still. The sea speaks, it is not always wise to listen. The nocturnal, the forgotten. So you'll notice that there's a pretty careful division between things that are called principles and things that are not. Rose, the rose which encompasseth all, 9 directions to new horizons. Exploration, enlightenment, hope. So the idea here is that you have, if you did a philosophy course, you might be able to think of these as sort of like the forms or something like that. But these are basically principles that govern the world. There's definitely a certain logic that the game has. So some examples that we might give would be, what, let's maybe think a little bit about, let's try and find something that's very, here, let's think of like wrenches and spanners. Is there a principle that calls to you a favorite? Yes, lantern for sure. I'd probably say my holy trinity is lantern, knock, and I've actually been growing quite fond of edge lately. So lantern was the first and remains my favorite of the principles for sure. The other one that really spoke to me when I first played Cultist Simulator was knock. And then as I kind of continued on, and particularly after playing Exile, I became increasingly interested in edge, and specifically the idea of the chorality. So I was going to wait a little while before talking about the hours, but the hours are kind of this godlike entities in this setting. And there are 2 in edge. So there's the reference to the one who's sort of scarred and cannot be wounded. I think let's... all conquest occurs the edge. One who dwells there is blind and cannot be wounded. Another is strong and grows stronger. So these are references to the Colonel and to the Lionsmith. And there's sort of this eternal conflict between these 2 hours. And it is sort of said to be the engine that powers the world. And that engine is known as the chorality. So that was an idea that really resonated with me, and I definitely have a preference for the Colonel more so than the Lionsmith. I have an idea. There's a way that I sort of explain the chorality to myself, and I'm not going to try and suggest that it is an interpretation that you would want to draw for your own run through Book of Hours or Secret Histories. But what I kind of like to do sometimes is just map these ideas to my own life, right? Like sometimes you'll just think, you have a sudden moment of inspiration. It's like, oh yeah, that was kind of a mothy moment there, or you'll feel really, really thirsty, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a Grail moment, right? It's apparently there was a thing with the Darkest Dungeon development team where when people were getting really like stressed out over the course of development, one of the things that helped them was the fact that there were like the stress mechanics in the game, and that was sort of how they were able to explain, okay, yeah, no, he's they'll use the mechanics that they've got inside of the game to explain, he's got his, he failed his, what do they call it? The resolve test or something like that. And that was a way that they kind of kept being able to talk to each other, even though they're all sort of seeing their, the money that they have to be able to make this thing sort of get burned up over the course of development, and they need to deliver. So I think that's, there's something kind of fun to do when you're given tools to play with like that. It does give a tarot feel, that there's meaning or feeling behind each. Yeah, no, it's a good point, because if you've seen the tarot of the hours are, well, not all of them, but a lot of the hours actually do show up as major arcana. And I do think there is a reading that you can get about some of the different hours based on their positions in the deck. The only thing is I don't know that much about tarot, so they're very pretty pictures and I like them, and that's why I own that deck. Hey, Selphea, how are you doing? Folks, in addition to Lord Gloom, we have got the lovely Selphea in the stream. I feel like it's been a while since I've chatted with you, and that's just partly because I've been playing hooky from Dendrian's stream, but Selphea is a very capable seems like I'm pulling back. I should come up with a better description, but Selphea is a lovely streamer, in addition to being a lot of fun to hang around with in Dendrian's chat. I always kept saying is like, my time at Sandrock Streamer, although I have it on good authority, you do play other games. I just wound up seeing, oh no, actually there was a puzzle-ish one that you were playing that I can never remember the name of. But no, it's all good. I am actually fond of being able to. Here's the big thing for me, right? Like I remember when I was starting off on Twitch, there used to be this thing about shoutouts where everyone was always the best ever, right? And if everyone is the best ever, no one is the best ever. And the best that I can do here is that, I have a channel I would like people to pay attention to. Lord Gloom has one, you have one, everybody has one. But I think the best that a broadcaster is ever going to ask you for is a chance to entertain you. And so one of the things I like to try and do is not just say, so-and-so stopped by on my channel, so I'm gonna sell them to you. It's to give people a specific reason of why they are worth checking out. For instance, one thing I really loved about your particular broadcast was when you had that. Well, actually, I guess you weren't broadcasting during that time, but I actually really liked your co-op session with Dendrian. I actually thought that the rapport over that was a lot of fun to watch. And then, of course, you just have a nice interaction with your audience. You do a much better job of paying attention to the game while also being able to talk with chat. And these are usually the qualities that I like to be able to shout out. And of course, I was talking about Lord Gloom and their time in Cobalt Core as well. So, again, I'm not under an illusion that everybody's going to go wind up, following everyone off of that. But at the very least, if you can give someone a reason to check out a channel, I always think that's a nice thing to do, just because in the end, there's so many people telling you what you should do with your time. At the very least, you can get some kind of help on that whole sorting problem in terms of figuring out whether or not something's for you. And of course, when I sell everybody's channels short, please forgive me. It is my lack of salesmanship. But Book of Hours is going very well. We're almost through all of the books that I've been shelving. I've actually been explaining a little bit of the world here, so it's a short break before we start moving on to some of the other books. But if you've been wondering about the setting, this is actually not a bad time to learn a little bit more, because we were talking about the principles behind the world. If any of you, by the way, want to share what your own principles, the ones that you're interested in, whether you want to talk about those main principles I was talking about, or some of the new ones, I'm very curious which ones happen to speak to all of you. because that is part of the start for Book of Hours. But in addition to the principles, which again are sort of kind of considered to be maybe, let's say, these fundamental building blocks. Oh, actually, sorry, we were talking about sort of how they show up in the world. So they can show up in mundane things. So in the case of spanners, when you need them, you need them. Why is that? Well, the principle of transformation and destruction. So it's like you can kind of see how Forge maybe would be related to spanners and sort of building and construction and transformation. And then, a saw. Well, that would probably be edge because, well, a saw has a bunch of edges. So some of them are actually very straightforward kind of... Oh, actually, one of the other ones that I forgot was scale. Hard without, hard within, hard to rouse, harder to subdue. What is left of the crude powers of the deep earth. So, well, fish have scales. Probably not surprising that mackerel has the scale aspect. But what you tend to get is not just it's not just the the obvious things that will have certain aspects. So you have this idea that there will be, and this comes up in Cultist Simulator too. There will be the presence of certain principles, and it shows up in certain ways. So when we took a look at the description of knock, right? The principle called knock permits no seal and no isolation. It thrusts us gleefully out of the safety of ignorance. So there is a description when you have a high knock influence about how just things don't ever seem to stay locked. So you can kind of get this idea that when you're in the presence of a very large amount of knock, you find it really hard to keep your shoelaces tied. Or like windows sort of start just opening a crack on their own, and you have a really hard time shutting them down. Like those are the sorts of things that you can kind of imagine. And again, there are these ideas that these principles show themselves in small ways in the world. But then the closer that you get to the principle itself, the higher the intensity. And that's usually when you start looking at sort of more occult or more, some of the more powerful and mysterious things. So for instance, we have the glassfinger toxin. What is within without, what is without within, a poison sacred to the votaries of the Menascate. Well, in this case, this is 4 knock intensity, and again, I've never heard of a poison that, that does that. So, as you can imagine, it has a higher level. And then the big thing we've been looking at, the Incastum Terminale, Porphyrine, the Incastum Terminale of the Second History. It's the glowing crimson mauve of the secret histories. Porphyrine was venerated in secret by a confraternity of corresponding Cluniacs and Benedictines. Use an Incastum ink with your journal to make determinations and record histories. If the hours listen, the world changes. So this is clearly a very powerful ink, which is talking about specifically communicating with these godlike entities in this setting. And so naturally it's going to have a much higher level because this is like wizard ink, basically. So it is a very fun way of looking at the world, and the hours, which do correspond to hours of the day, in addition to being the godlike entities inside of this world, they are attached to one or more principles. So, for instance, the Watchman, also known as the door in the eye, is the lantern aspect, and only the lantern aspect. Then we got the Menascate, what is within without, what is without within. This is the same Menascate as referred to in the Glassfinger toxin. And this one has the moon aspect, although I also know that the Menascate is a god from light, and so would have the lantern aspect as well. Sun and Rags, when it ends, it will be a beautiful ending. Winter and Lantern, and the Madrigad, that which is not needed, that shall be quenched. So that's a lantern and forge. And again, you can carry on with all of this. How do you learn all of this stuff? Well, you just read the different fragments and you sort of piece this stuff together over time. But there are servants of the hours, and they will be names, which are sort of the next tier below. And we've seen some references to names of the hours. So, for instance, if we go for the aspect of Malachite, Melissa, Queen, and Pallas, one of the kinder aspects of the Malachite, Melissa, both queen and Pallas, who feeds all comers, whose body is the house in which her children dwell. Melissa was not always a name of the Malachite. She may have been a name of another hour. She may have even begun among the Carapace Cross before she chose eternity over history. So names would be the next sort of level down, and then we have the long, which would be the next level below that. And you actually you either become or encounter a long in Cultist Simulator, depending on how you handle things. But the best example that we have of a long would be Julian Cosley. Julian is known to be a winter long. At a prescribed date, his hour patron will ensure him a beautiful ending, but until then, he is even harder than most long to dispose of finally. That said, he is known to have been defeated by an ascendant long in the 1920s, and his true current status, a diminished survivor, a determined memory, something else, is the subject of esoteric debate. So yeah, that's basically it. And I mean, in the case of the Secret Histories games, so that would be Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours in terms of the PC games, or the digital games, let's say. And then for tabletop, there is The Lady Afterwards, which is an adventure set in Alexandria. And finally, you have the Locksmith's Dream, which is a live event, which is set in Treowin, which is a real location just inside of Wales. And that is that also takes place in this setting. But essentially, in all of these different properties, what the idea is that you are given a glimpse on this world, and you are sort of left to figure out what that means, and specifically what role you are going to have in shaping that world. So again, I apologize for the extended description. I don't know if this is any more clear to anyone, but that is a rough hierarchy. So basically, when we're talking about hours, those are the big and most powerful entities that we've sort of encountered in the setting. The next layer down is names. The next layer below that is the long. They tend to be running around the Mansis, or at the very least have some sort of a relationship with the Mansis. Obviously, we've been talking about certain people who aren't in the Mansis or aren't allowed to be in the Mansis. There's always exceptions. And governing everything in the background here are principles, which can sort of be thought of as the fundamental stuff of the world, I guess. All right, let's make some progress. So I have one more book in this part of the library. This is the Severn Chamber, and I'm going to read On the Matter and Deeds of Serpents. This is probably the Prophecies of the Naga rendered into English and illustrated by William Midnight in Paris in the 1880s, but it shows a number of divergences from that text. It's certainly quite recent by the standards of VAC texts. So we will use our whist to read that one here. So we didn't read that one before because I only have VAC you can only use the language to translate one book. So, by the way, I really do like the descriptions of the language. So I'm going to read the description to VAC, but I'm actually also going to read the other languages as well, because I do like a few of these, and it's a chance for people to talk about the ones they're most interested in. So, VAC, before the gods arose from blood, before ape stood upright, this was the language heard in the house of the sun. I am VAC, the peacock door boasted, both the tongue and the goddess. I am the only entrance into secret light. I was worshipped before you upright apes, and I will still be when all of you are ugly ash. Listen, and I will prove it. I have a bit of a theory about VAC. I don't know how well established this theory is, but apparently there is this suggestion that there may be, I think they're called the Indo-European languages, but basically there's a common ancestor to all of them, because if you look at, I guess, sort of Sanskrit and Latin, and you've got all of the, well, basically all of the, actually, let me see if I can, no, you know what, that's a fun Wikipedia article to look at, but it might take me a while to find it. But basically, there are a lot of notable similarities between them, and so there's been the suggestion that there might have been a common language that they come from. And if that's true, in this case, in the world of Secret Histories, I think the idea here is the VAC is the one that they're all sort of descended from. I could be wrong in that, but I do know that one of the developers is a big nerd for linguistics. I am not, so I don't know that much about the topic, but that's one possibility. We have Fusine. A people lived east of the lost Lake Fusino, which is a real place. Horus warned that theirs was a land of witches. This was their language, called by some the dry tongue, and by others the tongue of witches. There is Kilisimi, which is a woven language. If there is speech in nowhere, if there is a language used by the dead, if the house of the moon has a native tongue, then it must be Kilisimi. If none of these is true, it is still not a language to be spoken in daylight. Each word breathes woe. Read it, they say, and weep. Sabazine. There is a history where Alexander defeated the first great knot of Sabazos, and then the King of Kings. There is another history where, instead, he learned from them. How many more? If we curl our hands into the correct shapes, we may yet understand. Hyksos. Now, I think this is a pretty cool one. The shepherd kings brought this speech west from Canaan to use in their wards and snares. Had they never come to Egypt, they might never have found a way to write it, given its addictive qualities. That may have been for the best. We just read Vac. I'm going to read Crack Track first. Crack Track, in the tracks of beasts and the convolutions of his own carapace, in egg vein and shell shadow, the many-eyed one found the signs which can be history. And finally, Deep Mandaic. It is worth mentioning that Mandaic and the Mandians are not just so Mandaic is a language, and the Mandians are a group, like an ethnic group and a religion. I believe actually the oldest surviving Gnostic, or the only surviving Gnostic sect. But the most secret script of the innermost rites of the deep sects of the deep desert, the birth tongue, it is claimed, of the Mother of Ants herself. The Mother of Ants is an hour, by the way. And then probably my favorite language out of the ones that we have here, Arecapaean, a language of surpassing beauty and elusiveness, revealed through the ecstatic apprehensions of the Orifix, the Eleusinians, and the Sibyls of the Rhine. Arecapaean, these mystics claimed, allows the elaboration of hues, sensations, and states of mind too subtle for grosser tongues. So it's basically the language that the Elcor speak. Anyway, as fun as that was, do let me know what languages you think are, of the invented languages, you think are the most interesting. And I'm going to have to decide now whether I would like to start reading the upper level books that I have here, or perhaps I want to start working on the Cucurbit. I think I'm going to start working on the Cucurbit. So I think we can just do the lacquered chess set and the mop and bucket. I think everything else is going to be consumed if I try to examine it. So yeah, activating the Cronsicord will use it up. Now, I'm not opposed to using it. I just don't want to use it now. Oh, sorry, there's a third item. The Spartan chair. And I don't want to use my health on that. I want to do some beekeeping. Bees, like librarians, are not to be trifled with. Honey or beeswax, if I am careful. Hive, the nest, and the chrysalis are the three secret principalities of the lesser world. Two of those three know the temptations of sweetness. Okay. So, let's start. We'll start with the things on the ground and move our way up. Although I will just double check. So I believe the year tally is also something that gets consumed when we investigate it. Pitcher of water won't do Don Lion coffee as much as I'd love the coffee. We're not going to drink that. We have probably already read the Lacquered Bone chess set. I believe it talks about the expressions of the king and queen, the opposing king and queen, and then the mop and bucket. So we'll start with the chair and the bucket. Those are not too dramatic. And then whatever we have left over we'll use with the rest of the day. So investigate the object. You won't use this up or consume it by doing this. All right, and Zachary Wakefield would like something, so everyone's always looking. If I find how they're going to end, I can offer them that. Try a book with as much winter as their winter interest. So, given the way that I've organized the library, it's a bit of a challenge. So, I am curious what happens if you give someone something too low. Yeah, so if it's too low, it just sort of repeats itself. Glimmerings, no. So if I can, I'd like to find a 6 winter text to hand off. Just so I can save myself the trouble of potentially running out. There we go, Ablations in Iron. And that's in English. This is how it's going to be. How some of it has to be. This is a monster hunting initiate of the hour named the Colonel, who identifies herself as Little Sophia, records the exhibits she has rendered to the Worm Museum in the Mansis. So while we're waiting, I was going to talk a little bit about the chorality and a way I try and make sense of it. And it's not, again, I don't want to try and suggest that this is a way you should necessarily apply it to understanding Cultist Simulator or Book of Hours. It's just a way that I sort of like to roll the ideas around in my head. Sometimes it's just nice to be able to do these mappings of the different topics in your mind. Um, also, I can't remember if I checked out the Stimfling. Just give me a second. For those of you that don't know, I have a spreadsheet that I consult. Oh yes, the Stimfling gave me the Horizon sight. All right. The Spartan chair, the cushion has been removed, perhaps as an act of petty revenge. Hard librarians value hard chairs. I really like that one. All right, let's take a look at the mop and bucket. Galvanized steel enriched with the stains of a dozen years of methodical mopping. So the Chorvality. One thing that I note about this is that the Lionsmith is associated with Forge. I mean, the hammer's a bit of a giveaway. I'm trying to remember the kernel. I think the kernel is Winter and Lantern, maybe? Maybe it's just Lantern. Anyways. The idea of the kind of eternal conflict between these two being the engine of the world, there is one thing that I kind of like to think of when it comes to the Chorvality, and it's this idea that the best way for me to probably think about this would be in terms of ideas. So you can think of these as maybe art movements or philosophical movements, but what you will tend to have is you will have these systems which sort of try and put everything in their place. They're very sometimes static, or they're very maybe even rigid might be a word that you could use. And then there are these other moves which tend to be entirely about sort of the dissolution of systems like that. So if you happen to like pre-Socratic philosophy, probably one of the best examples that you could get of this would be sort of this conflict between Parmenides and Heraclitus. Heraclitus was the one who said, you can never step in the same river twice. There's sort of this idea of this constant change, this constant, mixing of things. And then you have Parmenides, who has this incredibly strange philosophy, which effectively does not allow for any difference or change or or almost anything. You just have this oneness. And I guess the way you can kind of see Plato is this great synthesis of all of the pre-Socratics, but definitely what you will tend to get with things like the theory of forms is sort of seeing, I think most people will see this as kind of a resolution of this particular debate between these two. Now, it's not like you can sit down and expect everybody to talk about pre-Socratic philosophy. That's a fairly narrow interest. But you can see this just about all over the place, right? You have sort of postmodernism. You have a kind of a critique of everything. You have these efforts to sort of problematize every single text and this effort to sort of destabilize them as a result of that. But then you also have these very formal types of creation as well. So, one example I would maybe take would be music, where in some cases you have styles of music which are very, very strict in terms of the rules that they use. So in some cases it'll be, you can't use another note until you've sort of used all 12. And sometimes this can result in very interesting music, but other times this can actually result in the composers talking about, it being too constricting of a form. And then, of course, you can sort of imagine a move in another direction where, just about anything goes. And sometimes those aren't always as rewarding. So I'm trying to remember, there's a specific name for one of the styles I was thinking of, and I am completely losing it in terms of the name. Let me just see really quickly if I can... Let me just see really quickly if I can find it. Was it just 12 tone? Oh, serialism. That was what I was thinking of. But yeah, so basically the technique, the write-up that I have here, Schoenberg is the one who's sort of known for it. How are you doing, Vesper Fortune TV? We've got a lot of broadcasters coming in today. So for those of you who don't know, actually, for those of you who'd like to see what the end of Cultist Simulator looks like, for those of you who have not... why did that shout-out not work? I will try again in a little bit. Oh, there you go. Vesper Fortune TV is a VTuber who has recently been streaming Cultist Simulator. I believe is going for a Sensation victory. And I think you said this is the first time that you're going to be getting an Ascension victory in the game? No worries. You were very pleasant to chat with on the game. And obviously we are playing a Secret Histories game, so I always like to let people know about what they're up to. Although I will also say that Vesper Fortune is somebody who we met just on Friday, so I've not had the pleasure of being able to catch any other of their streams. So, but we also had Lord Gloom and Salfea in here. So I don't want this to be a channel just dedicated to shout outs, but it is always nice to build the communities, particularly for games which I enjoy so much, whether it is Book of Hours, Cultist Simulator, or Cobalt Core. But yeah, so the description here of the 12-tone technique, I'm just taking this off of Wikipedia. The technique is a means of ensuring that all 12 tones of the chromatic scale are sounded as often as one another in a piece of music while preventing emphasis of any one note. Through the use of tone rows, orderings of 12 pitch classes, all 12 notes are thus given more or less equal importance, and the music avoids being in a key. And again, you have different variations of this, but you can see how you go from a movement like this, and then the natural reaction to that is going to be something a lot more freeform, right? The one thing you can almost always be guaranteed to, to have an artist do is give them a rule, and they're going to want to break it. And so whether you like to think of this as sort of philosophical movements, whether you want to think of this as, as art movements, you do tend to have, in fact, you can also think of this in alchemical terms, right? Is it solve and coagula, right? The breaking down and the recombining, or the coagulate. I'm pretty sure people will be familiar with the word at least. So, and so again, I do tend to see, because you have the Lionsmith associated with Forge and this idea of sort of transformation and destruction, you can kind of see the pendulum swinging towards those ones which are a little bit more about the breaking down of systems, whereas you can see the kernel being the force of sort of building and sort of preserving. And so one of the things that's important about this is that my sympathies may be with the kernel, but the challenge is that if you have, so let us assume that, we completely ignore the idea of the chorality, which is that the edge dyad will never ever stop, right? It is eternal conflict between the two. Let's just say for the moment that we had the victory of the kernel. Well, what we're sort of implying here would almost be, if this is kind of the way, if I were to follow the comparison to its logical conclusion, that's where we get the Parmenidean world, where you can't really talk about change or difference or anything. And then, of course, if you have, the victory of the Lionsmith, as much as everybody seems to prefer the Lionsmith, again, you sort of have this flying apart of everything. As much as I enjoy, as much as I enjoy modern things, I will definitely say that it definitely seems to be a very dominant way of thinking to critique things and to sort of tear them down and break them apart. And again, there is a role for that. But I do sometimes wonder if maybe it might be a little bit better for us to move back towards construction and building things up. The observation that so much of our science fiction is very dystopian and this great critique of society, and yet if we don't build these worlds that we want to live in, where are the engineers getting their inspiration from? So yeah, in any case, whether you find that a particularly interesting way of thinking about the chorality, or this is a bunch of nonsense and you really wish I would go back to playing the game, that's the Colonel and the Lionsmith, and this idea that the Coravality, the battle between them, is this engine of the world. It's essentially those two forces of the world, and it's never the victory of the one over the other. It is precisely the tension between the two that allows things to happen. Let me just catch up with some of the comments because these are always interesting. Catastrophically Emma says, that's what I like about modernist poetry. They find rhythm and flow in free verse and focus more on imagery than a particular structure. Very good point. And as Vesper Fortune VT says, all things in balance. You've been on a big T.S. Eliot kick again lately. Wonderful. I mean, the nice thing about playing Weather Factory games is they do attract a very literary crowd, so I get to pretend that I actually know what I'm talking about rather than constantly reading nonfiction. All right. So we have got mop and bucket, galvanized steel enriched with the stains of a dozen years of methodical mopping. Very, very, very faintly, even after all these years, the unmistakable yeasty, marshy odor of prophet slime. Let's see what happened with Wakefield. This is how it's going to be, how some of it has to be, and we've got a bronze spintria for it. Occult treasures are purchased with occult coin, spintria. Bronze spintria usually display the act of shaping on their reverse side. I'm going to feel bad pointing this out, but have I told all of you the origin of the word spintria? There is an interesting etymology for it. While we're waiting for an oh, actually, hang on. Before I do that, I'll get my Faust back. And what else am I missing? Oh, the On the Matter in Deeds and Serpents. This is probably the Prophecies of the Naga, rendered into English and illustrated by William Midnight in Paris in the 1880s, but it shows a number of divergences from that text. It's certainly quite recent by the standards of VAC text. The serpent folk, called the Great Hooded Princes, came to know the order called the House of Leith and warred across the miles with them. They made an alliance with the mother of ants, whose children they had been. The text describes how the Great Hooded Princes escaped, or will escape, from the fifth history where they had died, or were doomed to die. They engaged in a secret conquest of the land of the Great River called India in some histories, and have ensured that all other conquests of that land are false conquests. Okay, so this is a nice little milestone for me because all of the different books and filing systems that I've put together, we've now finished the Severn Chamber, which means that we're essentially up to the nave of the Abbey Church. So we still have quite a few books to read, but that's once these are done, that's it. We won't have any more books to read. What I've been hoping is to try and find some more treasures of the house, but no such luck yet. Tuppence will buy me a hearty meal in a quiet place where I can rest and gather my thoughts. You love the lore and the world building. You tend to enjoy the sister and the witch stuff most. So is it the sister and witch or the witch and sister? That's a fun one, actually. I've never ran into anyone, but I'm always bad at telling the two apart. When I see it, I know it, right? Because you have the two sort of split apart. I'm going to guess you have to like the witch and sister because of the V shape. But then you also have the Sister and Witch, which is about bringing together. Rhapsody on a Windy Night is one of your favorite poems of all time. Okay, I'm going to write that down. Catastrophically, Emma. Feel free to elaborate on why you like it or sell us. You can give us the shout out for Rhapsody on a Windy Night so that everybody runs out and reads it immediately. But you must, Vesper Fortune, in that case... oh, actually, no. If you've not played Book of Hours, I have some very good news for you. And I won't go too far into this, but I think the existence of something. So you may recall the Geminiad from Cultist Simulator, a fragile manuscript illuminated with with twin shapes of sad and luminous beauty, and with all the phases of the moon. It might be as old as the 7th century, but the language Fusine is much older. Its cover is tooled goatskin decorated with garnet. And this is one of the books that does talk about the twins. But volumes 2 and 3, there are volumes 2 and 3 in Book of Hours. So there's two additional entries. And in fact, Gemini 3 is the one that has the description from Cultist Simulator. Coral decorates its cover, and its page edges are sharp enough to slash a throat. And on top of that, I am sorry to keep talking about this, but this will probably interest you as well. There's an advent calendar that Weather Factory is doing, and so today's advent calendar announcement was the first expansion for Book of Hours called House of Light, and you will probably be very interested to see the quote at the top, which says, "Only twins drown twice. Europe 1937, the war in the world is coming, and worse yet, the war in the sun. In this gathering gloom, the notables of the occult underworld consider new weapons, new alliances, new paths. Who can they turn to for help, if not the librarian of Hush House? Explore visitors and their stories in much greater depth, host exotic feasts and sophisticated soirees, and in your own quiet way, shape the genesis of the controversial Lighthouse Institute. The House of Light content expansion comes to Book of Hours next year." So there's another references to the twins. So in addition to the fact that you have 2 more volumes of the Geminiad, there's a direct reference right at the top of the new expansion. Again, not coming until next year, to the twins. So it sounds like you're going to be getting a lot of twins content coming up. Catastrophically, Emma says it is one of his earlier poems, and this referring to T.S. Eliot. Written in 1911, explores themes of time, memory, and the internal mind through a narration of someone walking through a town in the middle of the night, giving fragmented accounts of the experience. You're selling me on it. All right, let's check out the lacquered bone chess set, and then we will say that we're done the first room of the Cucurbit. Well, the first room where we were examining items. Investigate this object. And I am sorry to do this to all of you, but Spintria. So Spintria are tokens that were found in ancient Rome. I believe the root word for it shares... Let me get the exact reference here. Because you're all talking about poetry and high-minded topics, I need to bring this up. So a spintria is a small bronze or brass Roman token. The tokens usually depict on the obverse an image of sexual acts or symbols, and a numeral from the range of 1 to 16 on the reverse. The name Spintria was used by Suetonius to refer to young male prostitutes, from the Greek sphincter. In the 16th century, the name passed from the ancient sense of the persons committing outrageous acts, in other words, sexual or sensual acts outside what was considered the norm, or the place where outrageous acts occurred, such as Tiberius's gardens on the Isle of Capri, to the tokens themselves. And so, I am pleased to inform you, with the root word sphincter, what we are really talking about in terms of the currency of the occult world are ass tokens. So... Catastrophically Emma, to bring us back to the light, says, "My favorite lines from the poem are 1:30, the street lamp sputtered, the street lamp muttered, the street lamp said, 'Regard that woman who hesitates towards you in the light of the door which opens on her like a grin.'" That is a nice line. Lacquered bone chess set, Born of Battles. The White Queen and Black King are both scowling, but the Black Queen and White King are both grinning delightedly. Remember, by the way, we were talking a little bit about how each of the different principles will touch the various items. And so you can definitely see why edge shows up with chess. And this is true in a few different cases, although I don't know if I have any other direct references in terms of Book of Hours. But the other interesting one is the winter, and I'm assuming it's specifically because it is a bone chess set that there is that winter aspect as well. No, that's true. Actually, I don't know how many of you know this, but there is a document that outlines some of the influences for Weather Factory. Let me just bring that up. I won't read the whole thing, but I think because a lot of you read books and fill your mind with other people's thoughts, this will be of interest. So, I think The Wasteland is the Eliot. Yeah, T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. sorry, I think I just heard something drop in the other room. I'm sorry to do this. I'm going to take a very small break, one to deal with whatever happened there, but I'm also going to just take the chance to refill my water. So you all can take a look at that list of influences, and hopefully I'm not going to have to like rebuild something in the other room. I will be back really quick though. So sorry to leave so abruptly, but I do just want to check in on something. I'll be back in a sec. I forgot to turn off the mic, but it wasn't too catastrophic. Just give me a second here and I'll... Okay, that did turn off the mic. Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, nothing catastrophic in the other room, but it did give me a chance to refill my water. And if you're looking, I think there is actually a mythology book in that list. It's very hard for me not to talk about Ovid's Metamorphoses, which I realize is one that almost certainly would come with some kind of trigger warning or other sort of red flag in terms of reading, but it is easily my favorite ancient poem, and it's basically this vast, ever shifting kind of romp through all of kind of classical mythology. The mythology books that are recommended in that list are Kevin Crossley Holland, The Norse Myths, and Geoffrey Ashe, Mythology of the British Isles. I'm sure there's probably another one in there that I'm forgetting. And then, I mean, there's the usual suspects. So I've actually never read all of Bulfinch's mythology. I'd really like to. But, okay. So, sorry about the impromptu break, but we are back and ready to go. And we got honey for our efforts. Oh, the mythology in this universe. Yes, actually, I mean, so part of the fun on this is the process of discovery, and I remember someone who was kind of eager to try The Lady Afterwards, the tabletop game, and they did express a bit of disappointment in the sense that it wasn't a full source book, in the sense that it didn't like explain everything that was going on. But this is the big challenge, right? Is that in some senses, if you do that, then you're potentially cutting yourself off from the from the fun of discovery, and all of the different sort of mysteries and theories that people are running around with. But on the other hand, sometimes people just want to know the answer, and trying to find a way to balance those two priorities is a bit of a challenge, I think. Yeah, I mean, I've benefited. Sorry, there will be one more link that I throw out here because I know this will be news for some of you, but this actually came up in a job interview that I oh, this is interesting. This isn't the number one. Here we go. This is an article that I did. Now, if you are not familiar with Cultist Simulator, this will be absolute gibberish, and it's definitely not limited to the hours, but this is actually a network analysis I did from all of the individual files inside of Cultist Simulator and sort of working out the different relationships. So you just want to read the pretty stuff in like that one book. The oh yes, I believe. Where is it? That would be those indignities perpetrated by the deceitful fraternity of obliviates. It is not clear whether CROD, who is identified only by his initials, was in fact an initiate of the Obliviate Order of Immortal Adepts. He wrote in the 16th century after the order, if he is to be believed, had passed the height of its power. And that's actually part of an overall section. So essentially we've combined the House of Leith, the Obliviate Order, sorry, the Order Lamea, House of Leith, Order of Obliviates, and then High Traditions of the Noble Endeavor, or the Endeavor Club. They're all sort of in one big collection. Oh yeah, I mean, Oblividiots is an absolutely wonderful coinage, which I'm never going to forget in this game. So sometimes books are just really fun. Like, so actually another example would be the Franklin Bancroft Diaries. Like, there's technically no reason for me to be reading the Bancroft Diaries. They're just very fun to read. So we actually met Franklin Bancroft in this game at some point. I won't say where, though. Better now. Okay, so we've got time for one more. It is summer. I am sitting on the bench outside the Sweet Bones, eating crumbly cheese in nettle wrappings and good black rye bread, soaking up the sun. So, now here's a question for you, Vesper. What do you know about the gods from nowhere, if anything? If you do know something about them, do you have an opinion? Actually, that can be for everyone, but we've been talking about hours with Vesper, so. Looks like we just have the bowls in here. Everything else is going to be consumed if I use it, so. Kitchen bowls. Cake time. Investigate the object. And we did finish this room, so we'll say this is the jail hall. Here the guards and the prisoners would take their meals. Sometimes callers, too, would descend from his tower and discuss philosophy with poisoners, ethics with Antians, theology with Labites. Afterwards, he would generally burn his notes. Nowhere is familiar, but I think it's the one that you have the least lore on. I think I know the Vagabond. Okay, I don't think the Vagabond is a god from nowhere. But yes, nowhere is definitely not always directly referred to. We know it's below the mantis, and we know that it's lit by lamps of black nephrite. The first god from nowhere that I knew about was the Crowned Growth, because of the art. Weather Factory posted a series on the art that they did for some of the tarot cards. But the ones I know about now are the Mare in the Tree, the Applebright, Snow, although Snow may be in reference to someone else, the Rising Spider, and I think that's it. Mare in the Tree, Applebright, Rising Spider, Snow, Crown Growth. Yeah. Can't think of any of them ones. Right, the worms. There are definitely worm references. Oh, here we go. Worm inhabited cell. The occupant of this cell could not be allowed fresh air and exercise. It could not have reasonably been expected to leave the cell ever again, even while it wore human shape. But it could not be confined forever. In the end, somehow, it found its way into the walls. It is not yet time for cake. So the other thing that's funny about this is that there are two sets of worms in this setting as well. So there is the there are the worms like the the ones that we were referring to here, or the desiccated witchworms, nasty little things, but almost safe when they're this dead. But there's also the worms in the sense of the political factions, the birds and the worms, who are aligned with history or eternity. And so that definitely creates some complications when you are trying to refer to specific groups, because, it's the same name. It's like referring to hours. Like, it's not wrong to say that the hour is the unit of time, and yet when you refer to an hour in Book of Hours, it's usually also a reference to a very specific concept or entity in the game. So I don't think I'm familiar with Welcome to the Night Vale. But then again, that's not news. I'm not exactly plugged in. I also forgot to read the summary of what was going on with the affair of the particular Mystique, so we'll do that before the day is done. The Suppression Bureau has a growing interest in the recent fad for unconventional, often prophetic religious movements. No laws have been broken, nothing sinister has come to light. All these movements are comfortingly solar in nature, but there does seem to be something going on. Visitors with an interest in winter or lantern mysteries will want to talk about this. We started with Douglas Moore. D.I. Moore was mostly concerned that the cults might be a breeding ground for Long, and so increase the incidence of the crime of the sky. Arthur Moore, Lieutenant Moore, dared to hope that he might begin to understand the sun's plan. Dr. Serena Blackwood dismissed the whole business of cults as a popular delusion in a time of change. Corso suggested that the new doctrines had suggested a connection to him between the enigmatic hour called the Chandler and a name of the watchman, Sunset Celia. And finally, Zachary Wakefield, the visitor from today. It wasn't clear what Zachary Wakefield intended with the new crop of cults, but it was clear that it was nothing especially constructive. Oh, I'll definitely check it out, Vesper. Welcome to Night Vale is a radio play, effectively. You don't like being talked to, so you never got into it, but it's very popular, a bit like a weird mystery supernatural. Cool. I do actually like radio plays. When I was growing up, we had a lot of trips to Vancouver, and my dad would listen to either a lot of audiobooks. He tended to really like stuff like Tom Clancy and Friedrich Forsyth, and like very... It's where I kind of get the opinion that like basically techno thrillers are like science fiction, but the president's the main character. But what he would also do is he would listen to a lot of either BBC television shows as radio plays or just straight up radio drama. So I would listen to like a lot of Yes Minister, Yes Prime Minister, Rumpole the Bailey. There's another one that I can't remember offhand. Obviously, most of these are comedic. I mean, it destroyed me as a child, but, it's still fun. It did give me a fondness for radio drama. So when I got into Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I found out that had a radio play and was delighted to sort of seek that out and find it on my own. So I actually really do like radio drama, but I don't have as many opportunities to listen to it. I know in Canada, the CBC used to do quite a few, but budget cuts basically made them give that up. We used to have like a great soundstage for that sort of stuff. But again, it happened to fall in that gap between when podcasting really took off and like radio was sort of relegated to just being for like music and news. So if they just hung onto that for a while, I really think it's something that Canada probably could have excelled on. And instead, sort of the short-sightedness caused this great kind of great institution to sort of atrophy, and as a result, we're letting other nations, other creators, kind of take to the airwaves. The show takes place in the town of Night Vale. We listen to the radio announcer known as Cecil as he narrates the happenings in the town. Okay, so it's a little bit like Orson Welles' take on War of the Worlds. It sounds like. I realize that's not a perfect analogy, but it sounds a little bit in that style. Okay, we have read the serpent style glass before, but we didn't have anything else inside the kitchen, so I figure we'll go to the other two rooms and then we'll head on our way back up. So the jail kitchen. There are no hours at Brandkrug, callers used to say, even before he was governor of Brandkrug Jail, when he was only secretary vigilant of the Curia. By way of reminder, the hands were confiscated from every timepiece within the prison walls. The warders could still rely on the chimes of the great clock in the abbey spire, but it did make life harder for the cooks. Okay, let's... I've seen kind of everything in here already. This would be the most tragic thing for me to do with the metal, so we're not going to do that. I think we just need to work with the serpent-style glass, the saw, and I think that's it. But that's fine. It doesn't hurt to take a peek. Investigate the object. That should be the second to last one of the day. I think we did recover... No! Might be able to make something of this. By the way, for those of you who are podcast fans and haven't checked it out yet, there is a Weather Factory podcast called Skeleton Songs, which, given how many of you, again, like I said, like reading books and filling your mind with other people's thoughts, if you want to hear the creators of this game talk about all matters literary, they have a very, very good chemistry. I mean, they're husband and wife, so of course they have good chemistry. But no, they're a lot of fun to listen to. Like, it's both of them are very interesting to listen to on their own, but combined in a podcast, it is a very, very engaging broadcast. Which, if you're interested in game development, you'll get a little bit of it. But honestly, it is really just going into these topics in a certain degree of depth. You definitely get a fun... I mean, one thing I like about it is I almost always wind up with like another short story or another book to read. I've currently been reading Number Go Up, which is about the cryptomania. It's good fun. The serpent-styled glass. Carved snakes writhe up the frame. A prominent inscription reads, "To the librarian Willem, in earnest of our wager." Interesting. So that is different from this one. So that's also making a bit more sense. There's another reference between Willem Harries and Gervenius van Loren. I got to remember where I specifically read this thing, but I think the idea here is that these are the same person in some way. The inscription repeated on the base of the sand glass in Sanskrit, and indeed the style is Eastern, though I think somewhere further than India. Right now you are reading Cytine by C.J. Cheria, named after a Stellaris patch, because I found a good condition hardcover at the used bookshop for $5. Oh, I love used bookshops for that reason. And Vesper Fortune says, I am reading The Children's Hospital, and I'm glad my mom died at the moment. I don't think I've heard of either of those. Vancouver, there used to be this place called McLeod's Books. And my favorite... So I used to go in there at least once a week. But I was working on a movie. I was in the camera department. But there was this show I was working on, and there was a scene that took place in the bookstore, and we were mostly downtown, so locations did actually wind up. So the Stellaris patches are named after authors. So Cheria was actually one of the earlier Stellaris patch notes. So I was just being silly when I said that the author C.J. Cheria was named after a Stellaris patch note. It's obviously the other way around, but there is actually a patch note named after... Oh, Cherry, sorry. But yeah, anyways, there's basically just a patch that's named after that author. Sorry, I got... oh yeah, so this bookstore. So yeah, basically I was like delighted when I saw the call sheet, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I know... The legal name is actually Cherry, but the publisher told her to stick an H on it so she wouldn't be mistaken for a romance author. That is funny. What's tangled in these teeth? Oh, we got something. Oh, no we didn't. Eternally useful, though not for most librarians most of the time. Alright. So that's it for storage. The jail cellar, the entrance to the subcellar was barred, locked, chained, warded, both physically and otherwise. Whatever was kept down there, they took it extremely seriously. It looks very much as if the questing worms broke the seals, drawn by the power below. It looks very much as if they regretted it. So I don't think there's anything in either of these areas for me. So we've got the W, we've got the Oubliette ASMR, but we don't really have anything to interact with. So we're just going to leave that aside. Children's Hospital is Chris Adrian, and I'm glad my mom died is Jeanette McCurdy. Okay. Sorry, there was another thing I was going to say and I lost it. I'll figure it out later. We have a new day, so I don't think we need to worry about anything from Oriflammes, and I don't think there's going to be anything that happens today for us, so I can start on the staff room, or I can start reading the collections here. Actually, one thing I'll do for sure is beekeeping. Honey or beeswax, if I'm careful. You also read I keep my exoskeletons to myself, which was incredible. Yeah, like I said, I need to get back on my fiction reading. I never go out of my way to not read fiction, but it is often the case that I wind up either because of my wait list of the library or whatever it was. Oh yeah, sorry, I was talking about this used bookstore. But anyways, I inevitably wind up running through the running back to nonfiction stuff, and then I just kind of start knocking those down off the list. Although the one exception to this is that I have been enjoying my short story collection of H.G. Wells. That guy can write. The librarian is just as busy, if not busier, than the head cultist. You actually make a good point here, too, because for those of you who've been following this from the beginning, you will know that I did not commit any any skills to the Tree of Wisdoms. Now, that's obviously not the case anymore, but I could get the number of elements of the soul. That number could be much higher if I actually committed all these skills here. I've not done that because there are bits of information that kind of come out of making those decisions. So I've decided to work with what I have here. We will commit them. I'm just not quite ready to commit them yet. So one of the slight differences in terms of Book of Hours compared to Cultist Simulator is that you really only have two verbs to work with. You have the consider verb and you have the talk verb. But what you do get to do is you can use workstations to do tasks. So there are desks. Generally, you can use these to catalog or read books. But then you'll also have things like the telescope or even just a straight up like workbench. And all of these wind up, you can do different things with them. It sort of depends on the action that you want to perform, but you combine them with the skills. So technically you can do a lot more if you commit your elements, or if your skills to the Tree of Wisdoms. And the description here is the elements of the soul. So essentially, elements of the soul would essentially be one action that you can perform in the course of the day. The human soul is composed of 9 elements, and this is one. Most other things have simpler souls. Each soul card can be used once a day for the kinds of things that you do with your soul. That usually means talking to people or crafting. And actually, for the benefit of those who don't know these elements of the soul, I'm missing metal, but we've got core, exuberance, instinct, rhythm, one of the 9 parts of the human soul. Grail and heart, Arab, pride, compassion, hatred, and fear, one of the 9 parts of the human soul, edge and grail. Fet, that part of us which walks in dreams, one of the 9 parts of the human soul, moth and rose. Rose is one of the new principles, or things that act like a principle. Faust, sight, perception, inspiration, all the glorious gifts. This one is lantern and sky. Again, sky is one of the new aspects. Shapt, eloquence and understanding. The door opens both ways. Forge and knock. Tryst, the change and the longing. That's moth and moon. And whist, name, memory, that part which remains. Most librarians know that books have souls. Most librarians hope for books with simple souls of whist and nothing else. Winter and lantern. And then the one element of the soul that you are always guaranteed to start with in the game, no matter what. Health, the dwelling place of the soul, the 9th of the 9 parts of the soul, the only one that can be touched, which has heart, nectar, and scale. Okay, so I'm no closer to deciding how I want to divide my attention, though. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. $17 books. So maybe we just take care of this half of the church first, and then we'll read this half, and then we're done all of our books. You headcanon your cult as full of stooges, not to mention you keep getting monsters who, when you send on exploring, come back with people. You can play the game in a nice way, you know. You don't have to abduct people. But then what's the point of running a cult if you don't abduct people? Help with letters. I could help with correspondence and arithmetic. There is no Skrull in Brandkrug, and not everyone here knows their letters. Or add a coin to find visitors seeking employment. Okay, so yeah, I think we're going to try and read as many of the books in the church as we can. So that's going to be the Book of the Extinguished Heart. That one requires Deep Mandaic. We'll move on to the Pale Desk, and we have the 5 creations. That's a VAC text. The way that I sort of divided up the house, these are the books that sort of directly relate to sort of the hours and the Mansis. It's not always perfect in terms of the alignment, but that's roughly what this upper level is here. Okay, Natan's desk. We're still not going for the mackerel, but we will later. So, the true and complete accounting of the Asclepian mysteries, the roots of the house. That, I believe, is one that is in Cultist Simulator. True. Alright, we'll go... We'll use our Faust for a novel method for invocation and contrition. So we'll use my favorite Ericapean. Actually, maybe what I'll do is when I run into a work that I can't translate, that'll be when I stop reading all of these. Unhatched Hymns, which is Sabazine. I'm sure it has no relation whatsoever with the egg unhatching. Pure coincidence. Hey, whatever. Sorry, I remember you from before, so I'm gonna have to recycle this joke again. But 1,235,736 of your name. Yeah, no worries. I don't take attendance, and I need to provide whatever I can approximate as entertainment with people without necessarily having to rely on people interacting in chat. So I am delighted to be able to interact with people in chat, but it is by no means an expectation or a a requirement. Okay, this is a VAC text, so we will leave Origins of the Hours for later. But I do appreciate you hanging out. Thank you for speaking up. It's always just nice to be able to say hello. And again, I have been kind of rambling on about the setting and some of the different ideas. If anybody has specific questions or even just questions about the game, I am happy to cover them as well as I can. You're a fan of VAC? I'm definitely big on Ericapean, although Ericapean wasn't in Cultist Simulator. But the thing is that because I've been living with this game for, I guess a couple of months now, I take a lot of stuff for granted. And so, whether it's a question of just basics like what on earth are you doing in this game, or maybe something more specific like is Sky actually a real principle or not? I like being able to talk about this stuff. And I mean, if you want, I can just riff off all of the other things that we've been talking about in chat here. But I always feel like it's nice, particularly when I'm just reading the books and I'm not really pursuing any of the other things. I figure it's always nice to be able to follow up with chat and just make sure I'm not leaving too many people far behind. Yes, it is not just the same setting as Cultist Simulator, whatever, but it is by the same developers. So this chronologically takes place after Cultist Simulator. And you don't play... So far as I can tell, nobody you can play is a direct follow-up to anybody that you would be playing in Cultist Simulator. But there is actually a reference to the location that this takes place, Brandkrug. Specifically, the location is the Sweet Bones. And so I will offer that one of the endings for the Exile DLC makes reference to the Sweet Bones. And I will not go into any more detail because that would be a fun little reference for you to pick up on your own. But if you've not tried Exile, that is a very good DLC. So... An afternoon spent profitably reading newspapers to the curious, writing affectionate letters for the lonely, steering farmers through the requirements of the Ministry of Agriculture. So we will restore the Faust right away. It is summer, and I'm sitting on the bench outside the Sweet Bones, eating crumbly cheese and nettle wrappings and a good black rye bread, soaking up the sun. And sorry, for those of you that may be watching this on the VOD, Vesper Fortune said, Vac was basically, you're all ugly, you will continue to be ugly, and die ugly. And I like that energy. All right, let's read some books. So, the Book of the Extinguished Heart. In the days of the Shadowless Kings, Ennis Laslai was executed for prophesying the division of the sun. If any of his captors grew long, they probably feel rather abashed now. Lazuli indicates that the sun will be divided in the Mallory by the Forge of Days, armed with the love in her heart. Love will not be the cause of the sun's death, but rather envy. Envy will not be the cause of the sun's death, but rather thirst. Thirst shall not be the cause of his death, but curiosity. Curiosity shall not be his end. Rather, it will be love. Five Creations. The itinerant scholar Shohei debated 5 possible origins for humanity with a hooded figure since claimed to be the beach crow. Shohei later claimed that all of these accounts had proven false, but the debate was nevertheless recorded. The carapace origin. We were born from shell, like the children of the wasp from the spider. The glorious origin. Our life motes descended from light. The origin befouled. We were found naked and smeared with muck in the roots of the wood. Shohei's preferred theories are that we are the children of apes who walked upright, although his tone here is satirical, or that we consumed not only our parents, which is not the crime of the sky, but also our origin, so that we came from nowhere. Now, that is not the origin that we chose. I will just maybe warn you, what I'm going to show you in my journal here is a determination I made. It is not required. It is more just an option that you get to do, but this is tied a little bit to some of the later game stuff, just a fair warning here. But the origin that we chose was we came from glory. Our first sparks of self descended from the light above the world, which we call the glory. Without the glory, we would be beasts in darkness, and the gifts of our past illuminate our future, which is eternity. This determination is made with lantern. It provides lantern and moth. Carapace origin returned to crab. So I didn't want to go down here, but behold. Got a little crab guy here too. I think if you play the Dancer DLC, you might get a bit of Carapace cross lore. A true and complete accounting of the Asclepian mysteries of the roots of the house. Descriptions of the Asclepian mysteries reproduced by one Riley Gressa from supposedly a much older text. It's unlikely to be genuine, but it makes references to the house without walls and its wood right there in the prologue. This is very obviously not an antique text. At the very least, it has been badly mutilated, but it contains substantial intriguing material, especially a persuasive comparison of the house without walls, without doors to the human body with its many portals. The direction of death is down, the book explains. The peacock door has been considered a rent or an abrasion, but in some respects it is more like a mouth, if not a more treasured point of entry. Discussions of doors include a rite which may conjure creatures through those doors, although key incantations are missing. Oop, we went a little too far there. Dancer was your first attempt. Your dear dancer died because of first attempt. Fair. The Dancer's out. So the Dancer was the first DLC, but what is interesting with the various DLC is that there's the different phases that I went through in terms of getting Cultist Simulator. So the main reason why I really liked Cultist Simulator was I wasn't that far out of grad school, and just this idea of a game where you're pursuing this goal, which maybe really only makes sense to you, that and again, it's pretty clear what this is, right? This could be the play that you want to write, or the game you want to make, or the painting you want to do, just that thing that is special to you. And the fact that you have to balance that with the mundane world that sort of expects you to pay rent and eat and do all of those normal things. And it's not just that it gets in the way, but sometimes can be hostile to that. And the way that you find the balance was something that really appealed to me. And then, like I said, it's out of grad school, so to have this idea of reading all of these different arcane texts and trying to combine the knowledge together to that higher level certainly appeals to the temperament of the sort of person who will, obliterate his mind and body in higher education. But as you said earlier, the world building, although I will mention that the collection of essays that the designer of this game made is called Against World Building and Other Provocations. So that might actually be a worthwhile essay to read at some point. But the big one on this is just that the more I kind of got into it, the more I sort of started appreciating not just stories about Christopher Alopoli and Teresa Galmier. Incidentally, if you like Christopher Alopoli, Alopoli's Nook. Christopher Alopoli, poet, painter, archivist, ruiner of seances, stayed on for a while at Hush House after the Great War. The librarian, Serena Blackwood, arranged rooms for Alopoli in the Motley Tower, ostensibly so that he could help with the collection, but perhaps because she also saw a potential ally against the governor of the Cucurbit. Relations between the Cucurbit and the house were badly strained at the time. So So there's a reference to Christopher Alopoli. You also get to find out that Alopoli was not his original name. But yeah, there is just something about this game where after I got past that initial point of interest and I start sort of seeing the connections, there's a little bit more about this world going on, that it becomes interesting in its own right. And then you sort of start pulling on that particular thread. Not that that was never a point of interest, because obviously you can solve certain puzzles, much like this game, by sort of appreciating what certain principles or what certain ideas are and how they sort of relate to things that might be important to you. But, now I've sort of jumped in with both feet, and I'm quite interested in sort of the world of the secret histories and what's going on and some of the questions. So one of the questions I have is, it's not entirely clear to me, and this won't be from Cultist Simulator, but there are these ideas of the branches of the Watchman's Tree. So these are a number of special libraries which have sort of a special status in the world of secret histories. Hush House is one of them, but there are also ones like the Grove of Green Immortals and the Hostorium and a few others. One of them is the Invisible Serapeum in Alexandria, which I believe is a location that you visit in the tabletop experience called The Lady Afterward. And the question that I have is that, like, Alexandria is a reasonably important location in the secret histories, it feels. If the branches of the Watchman's Tree are the same in all 5 histories, because we know that there are 5 histories, the question to me is, we know in one of those histories that Alexander does not continue his conquest, right? He doesn't defeat Darius at Issus, and he doesn't carry on his conquests. He turns around and walks away. And the thing is that if I remember correctly, Alexandria was founded after that battle. So if Alexander turns away at Issus, then that raises the question, how does Alexandria get founded, assuming that the Invisible Serapeum exists in all histories? And the thing is, we don't know if it exists in all histories. We know, I think Vienna does, and I believe Traowen does. But as far as Alexandria and the Invisible Serapeum existing, number one, I'm making a guess that the branches of the Watchman's Tree remain consistent throughout history. That may not be true. But if that is true, then it invites the question in terms of how Alexandria is founded if Alexander does not actually perform his conquests. So that sort of stuff, again, you get to sit down and wrestle with and you're never going to get a direct answer to that in the books, but you're going to sort of nibble away around the edges. And once you start asking questions like that, when you play the DLC, so the dancer has a bit more about the Carapace Cross if you find that interesting. And the medium, so that talks about the palest painting, which is referred to on the White, Solomon Huscher's book. Incidentally, we do have another reference to Solomon Huscher. We've got Solomon's Preparation. Solomon Huscher would take this every night without fail before sleep to close his ears to the sound of the waves. But on the 9th of January 1838, a heavy snow fell on Hush House. When the other residents dug themselves out, Huscher was nowhere to be found. He had left a resignation letter and an undrunk measure of his preparation. Of course, because we know it's Solomon Huscher, it's Solomon's Preparation, I always just like abbreviating it to Preparation H. So then the priest. The priest actually I really like the priest. It feels like the one that's less loved among the audience, but particularly if you liked the Gospel of Zacchaeus and this idea of Christ sort of being related to not, like the wounds that he sustained being related to this great work of Knock and the Mother of Ants, then that is a really interesting DLC. And in fact, that is one where you can run into one of the gods from nowhere under certain circumstances. You think he died to depression? If you get far enough in that, there can be a very interesting twist that takes if you succumb to certain forces. It's actually probably one of the more difficult. It's the one that almost did me in terms of difficulty. As a very, very narrow path that you take when it comes to the priest, but it's a wild ride. It's an interesting one. And then if you like Edge, really, first of all, I think Exile was a real tour de force. But that is in addition to just completely transforming how Cultist Simulator works, that is one that is very heavy on the edge. And it is also where you move. It's a much more globe-trotting one. It's almost like the James Bond. Like, how James Bond, at least some of the older ones, like they would always go to exotic. I guess the thing is, like, if you're doing like, old James Bond, the idea of like going to Hawaii is this really aspirational and exotic location. Whereas, now it's not as expensive to fly, right? Like people do. I'm not trying to imply that I'm a wealthy individual. I actually travel very little, but like the idea of going to Hawaii is not this like incredibly exotic thing. Like this is a thing that people will do for vacation. And so, as a result, the series kind of needed to come up with increasingly exotic locations to live up to the promise. But again, if you think of the old James Bond, where part of the appeal, part of the aspirational part of the stories were all of these exotic locations. Exile is very much like that. You're jumping from location to location, and you're not just at your desk sort of ordering people to check out these locations in the world, but you are actually on the run. So it's very, very interesting. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I mean, so don't make me boss you around in terms of what you should do, but there's a lot of fun stuff to find. If you're getting into the world of Cultist Simulator, each of the DLC will just give you another perspective on that world, as long as you sort of like picking away at the edges. Because again, I can remember for a very large part of the time, I'm like, this is so beautifully written, and I have no idea what's going on. I still don't really have an idea what's going on, but I feel like I have a slightly firmer grip than I used to. All right, a novel method for invocation and contrition. Ingenious and rather beautiful techniques for entreating the names of the hours, developed by Roy Morrow, who styled himself the Sage Knight. The techniques rely on the unique qualities of the Arecapaean tongue. Morrow professes himself surprised that they serve better to entreat the names of the vagabond than the names of lantern or winter hours. Morrow demonstrates that preliminal meter techniques can be used with sufficient rows to invoke the vagabond's names, transforming an enduring reflection into something wider of sky. So that is definitely a recipe that I want to write down. Well, one of the things that I really respect about the writing for this one, so first of all, it's very impressive. As somebody who really likes writing essays, but really struggles to keep the word count in control, like under a certain level. Like I really try to shoot below 2,000 words, but it's hard, and I usually need to do a couple of other drafts to really get that word count down. The amount of information that is conveyed in sort of the card form, right? Like, say if you just take a look here, like this is not a lot of space to write, right? So the whole book here, there are admittedly longer sections, but these are pretty small fragments, and yet there is a lot of information that is conveyed. And what's even more impressive is that as you continue to play the game, so I'm sure you've probably noticed this, Vesper, like after you've died a couple of times, when you read certain books, sometimes you will have maybe done something like gotten past the white door, and then you'll read a book that basically tells you how to get past the white door. And like for me, I was like, oh, that's what they were going on about. So then what I do is I take that bit of information. I'm like, okay, well, that puzzle has been solved, but now I know how this game tells me secrets. And so the next time I'm struggling with a problem, I'll read something in a book and it'll be, the hunter's door. And then, you'll read another book and it's like, oh, and the hunter's door, as is called in other parts of the world, the stag door. And I'm like, okay, yep, now I know. Now I've got the connection. Or maybe, you're probably smarter than me. And it's like, okay, hunter's door, that's probably the stag door. And you just solved the problem. But that's definitely a thing. So one of the things that's really impressive about the writing, which doesn't draw a lot of attention to itself, is that it's one of these things that you can read it and you can reread it and you can read it again and again and again. And it's still something that even if you've played the game for a few years, because there is this fairly complex world going on in the background, it is actually still has the ability to potentially surprise you as the ideas start sort of falling into place and as you understand a little bit more about the world. And I have no idea how people do that. It's just really impressive to me. Cured, how are you doing? Stopping by on your break to say hi. I hope you guys have a good stream. It's been a wonderful stream. I always appreciate you stopping by, Cured, and I hope you have a good shift. I know I don't watch a lot of Twitch at work, but it's a nice break when I can. All right, let me just write this down. Like I said, I was writing down the recipes so I can try them out when I can. So we've got a novel method. So I know the game, if you click, it lets you just copy stuff to the clipboard, but I do actually like typing stuff out. Okay, I do still have a FET kicking around, so we can see what that does. Actually, I guess this would be for... excuse me. This would be for Catastrophically Emma. We're doing the preliminal meter. 9 modes, 9 horizons, the subtle rhythm of words which open ways. Been catching up with the VODs, and you are interested to see how you get the metal to use the pumps. Ah, yes, I definitely have solved that one. So... let me know what you think when you get through. Okay. So we have the preliminal meter. I do think this is one that I want to mess around with. We probably... I know I have another book to read, but... I think I can pull this off. I don't remember... where I can use Rose, though. There you go, St. Januarius. You can always rely on them solar types. Okay, so we can get a confounding parable with 5. We get an enduring reflection if we add a memory. And... okay, so this is the horizon sight. So there is a side of me that does actually want to get the confounding parable, or rather the enduring reflection, just for the sake of having one. I don't really see a benefit to making the horizon sight, but I suppose I can throw the sunny day in. Refine a memory to something of Rose. The Unhatched Hymns, hymns attributed to Saint Lucia the Eyeless, patron of glassworks and name of the hour called Menascate. The hymns venerate every sanctioned hour, celebrating them as the sun undivided, but also suggesting that each hour may become the next, madrigard to watchman, watchman to wolf, and so on. The Hymn of the Phases celebrates the Menascate from whom we do not turn, for the truth which is beauty, the beauty which is truth, and the perfect balance between the two. The Hymn of the Reflections more puzzlingly celebrates the Menascate as the sister of Janus, mother of Shadow, whose visage wondrous in emptiness can reveal all truths. There is, I mean, in terms of hoarding, one need only take a look at my Elopolis Nook and the dispensary, and then we've turned, we have the chapter house and the solarium. We definitely have a lot more flowers than I know what to do to do with. I know that's not the hoarding you were referring to, but that is actually a problem I run into in this game. I take too much stuff. Okay, so that was all the books for now. Let's move on to a novel method for invocation and contrition. So just remembering that I do want to investigate more of the Cucurbit at some point, but we are getting close to the end of my my time with the books. So I figure if I follow through with that, I can focus entirely on examining the various items in Hush House, and then we can move on to the consumables. Oh, hang on. We did that one. It was the Origins of Hours that I wanted. A second glory. probably just locked myself out of that because I used up all of these. So we'll move to Natan's desk. And Medusa's Lament. So this is definitely one of the ones about the death of the... Well, it says it right here, on the death of the hour called Seven Coils. I guess I'm going to break that statement that I said earlier. We're not going to talk about the deaths of the gods from stone. So yeah, I think the overall plan that I have for the session, we'll probably not get to that point tonight, but I think I'm going to put a bit more effort on reading these remaining texts, especially because they do sort of logically belong together, and as a result, I may be getting information that I wouldn't if I just read them all in isolation. Once those are done, we'll move back to the Cucurbit to look at the remaining items. Now, hopefully by then we'll run into a Numa, or I'll have gotten a book which will allow me to level up Pearl and Tide. Either way, I would probably be willing to force a Numa if it came down to it. And from there, I mean, the hope here is once I start getting some of the consumable things, I would, you know, I'd have more elements of the soul just to work through them really quickly. The reason why I'm hoarding the beeswax now, incidentally, is, I mean, we were originally doing this to be able to make some of the other ingredients, like particularly to make our porphyrin. But in this case here, I want to load this up so that I don't need to lose the Aglafotis scented candle or the history wax candle, that we can just make that on our own. And that way I can basically consume it as I build it. And that just happens to be a nice opportunity for me to play around with some of the crafting stuff that I haven't done yet either. Okay, on the origins of hours, the sage and ecstatic Soham, a frequent visitor to the Mansis, claimed to have discoursed with the beach crow in person. Soham later insisted on a sky burial. Soham's writings veer from poetry to confession. He identifies from flesh those who were mortal, from blood those who arose from sacrifice, from light, entry from the glory, and from stone those who arose before his knowledge. He insists that the moth was the first god who was blood, but later contradicts himself and claims that it was the Red Grail. I will mention, by the way, this, or we'll read this first, but we have a specific feeling as our character on this. The Mansis was different before the first god came from light, but never doubted existed even then. So we've actually made a determination, and again, just as I said before, this is technically related to some of the decisions you'll make later in the game, but what I'm going to be talking about is not the only direction that you can go. When we talk about Soham talking about, he insists that Moth was the first god who was blood, but later contradicts himself and claims it was the Red Grail, we have actually made a determination of that. Moth the oldest. The moth beats within the skull, seeks among the trees of the wood, is dappled. The moth, who delights in contradiction, is the oldest hour that remains. Any that seem older, the moth once was, when once it was. This determination is made with moth, provides moth and lantern. So, as a librarian, we do actually have an opinion on this matter, and in our case, we have we decided to go with Soham's first impression, and then as far as the origins were concerned, we did not go for our nowhere origin. We instead went for the our from light origin, because I am a big fan of lantern. How much do you want to know about where this game is going, Vesper? Because partly answering that question would actually deal a little bit with, you don't necessarily know what your main goal in this game is. So I'm leaving a few little hints for people to follow up on. And if you want, I can give you a straight answer and then just, warn people ahead of time. but the actual status of the librarian and what they do is something that you discover through the course of playing. And if you'd like that to remain a secret for yourself, I'd be delighted to keep that a secret for you. But I also don't want to be annoying and sort of say, you're not allowed to know things. So just let me know how much you want to know, and I can share. There is a minor version of this that I can do that can sort of take it. I can get you to the halfway point if you're interested in that. No spoilers then. Cool. So one thing I will share with you is the following. This isn't so much a spoiler as something that you may just realize a little bit later in your playthrough. So there's the Tree of Wisdoms here. This is a way of organizing all of your knowledge. So over the course of this game, you develop skills. The higher the level of the skill, the higher the level you can place it on the Tree of Wisdoms, assuming that it has been opened. So, and you can see the various principles at play here, right? So you've got Lantern, which touches on Nyctodromy, Hushery, Illumination. Forge touches on Oromachistry, Ithistry, and Illumination. In the case of, I believe this is Edge, it's Hushery, Oromachistry, and presumably Illumination as well. And then Heart, Birdsong, Preservation, Bosk, Grail, Preservation, Bosk, Skolakosophy, so on and so forth. You kind of get the idea. What's this blotted out one with a suppression bureau it's probably just a bug. Never mind. But what's interesting about this one is that the way you get more elements of the soul is by committing the skill. So there's kind of this nice sort of parallel that happens in this game where you wash up on the beach with only 3 elements of the soul and very little memory of what happened. And as you restore the library, you sort of also restore yourself, right? You're bringing back sort of your understanding and more of yourself, your ability to do things. But you can also commit skills to get those elements of the soul. You commit skills to the Tree of Wisdoms. And there are different outcomes as a result of that. So I'm going to take Bells and Braziers as an example. That resonance which lingers from the hammer's touch, that can be committed to Oromachistry, this wisdom concerned with the laws and disagreements of the hours and their emanations, or Ithistry, alchemy, metallurgy, pyrotechnics. Ithistry is sometimes called the art that alters. So let's take a look and see what happens when we put that in. So we have the toll. In the right mortal's hand, the right tool can become the weapon that begins a war. This is a high consequence of Oromachistry, and you get a medal for that. Or if you put it into Ithistry, the chime. In the right mortal's hand, the right tool can become the weapon that ends a war. This is a high purpose of Ithistry, and it grants a whist. Right? So you can begin or you can end. These are 2 contradictory outcomes. You can only commit this once, and when you commit it, it's permanent. And so essentially this is more about your understanding of the world and sort of what is the more primary... Hello, Takri. Good to see you. This is more about sort of what you think is sort of the more primary force or the higher goal of this particular skill. But it's kind of true for all of these, right? So we've got from change, the Watchman's paradoxes. We recognize the dream places that the Watchman shows us, though we have never seen them before. Perhaps we were something else when we saw them. This paradox is fundamental to Nyctodromy. Alternatively, we can put it in illumination. From light, our dreams are shadows cast by the Watchman's light, so we perceive him even in our shadow. This is illumination. And so ultimately, while this is not necessarily shaping history, there are definitely your understanding of the world is definitely reflected in what you commit to the Tree of Wisdoms or don't commit to the Tree of Wisdoms. And so what I've been talking about here, again, I've been hinting at some specific determinations that my character has made, but clearly what we are talking about are things that are maybe a little bit more about making some specific determinations about who was right on some of these things or what our understanding is. And this is something that's maybe being recorded in a book as just simply, lining these things up. And so you can push things even further in this setting, I'll say. And I figure I'll leave you to take that final step once you get into the things that are maybe a little a little less clear when you start the game. So this is the thing I like doing, right? Like I'm never that, but I'm actually very much not the sort of person who wants to scream no spoilers on stuff. Like if people think that they'll enhance the enjoyment of something, I mean Casablanca, right? Casablanca is a fine movie. Technically it's a surprise ending, but that ending has been lampooned so many times in so many different formats. There's just no possible way that you don't know about the ending of Casablanca by the time that you see Casablanca. And the movie's still great, right? But what I do tend to find is that you don't have to completely like put people in this hermetically sealed chamber to preserve the enjoyment. What you can do is you can gesture just enough to some of the mysteries or some of the interesting things that they'll get to do, but you just hold back that piece of information that brings it all together. So what happens is you suddenly realize you're in that moment of the game and you get really excited. So that's kind of the thing I like to do on this one. Plus, again, I'm not an expert on the setting, so even if I think there are certain things that are the case, they may not necessarily be. I think there's only one person who knows for sure, and they like to give very obscure answers when people ask them lore things directly. So, Cree, did you hear the big news about Book of Hours today? A second glory, the priest Jusei celebrates the extirpation of the gods who were stone, those hours who preceded humanity. Jusei engages in an apologia for the destruction of the hours. They were old, they were cowardly, they were vile, their time had passed, and it was the shining destiny of humankind to seize the house through glorious battle. Ooh. All right, I'm going to share something with you in a little bit. Jusei recounts how the hour called Seven Coils was slain in battle by the Colonel, how the Grail devoured the hour called Tide, and how the egg unhatching fled like a coward. He's quite vituperative about the egg unhatching. He warns darkly against its return. How could people not like the Colonel? Okay, before I move on to the next text, and again, apologies for those of you who are hearing this for like the 5th time, but man, this is good news. Where did I put it? Today's Advent Calendar. Door 11, only twins drowned twice. Europe, 1937. The war in the world is coming, and worse yet, the war in the sun. In this gathering gloom, the notables of the occult underworld consider new weapons, new alliances, new paths. Who can they turn to for help, if not the librarian of Hush House? Explore visitors and their stories in much greater depth. Host exotic feasts and sophisticated soirees. And in your own quiet way, shape the genesis of the controversial Lighthouse Institute. The House of Light content expansion comes to Book of Hours next year. So they announced the first expansion. I don't think it's news to anyone that this is something that they've been working on for a while. But it is now official what the subject's going to be. Yeah, it definitely sounds cool. So, and I think you are probably not surprised to know that I am very excited about the prospect of anything to deal with the Lighthouse Institute. So, I'm doubly excited for that reason. Where was the other one's probably the Sweet Bones. So. Scale secured. Medusa's lament on the death of the hour called Seven Coils, the father of the mother. The first part of the poem describes the ambush of the Seven Coils by a warrior scarred all over by the traitor gods, scarred even unto his eyes, so that the sight of the great coils would not destroy him. The battle rages on until the seven coils drowns in its own blood, at which point the narrative turns mystical and elusive. A seven-titled goddess arises from the foam of its blood. She is an armored queen, a serpent daughter, a key, a healer, a murderess, an oracle, but her seventh title is not to be revealed. The Cultist Simulator lore kind of reminds you of how it feels to read about the Elder Scrolls lore. That's actually kind of funny you mentioned that, whatever, because I did not originally care for the Elder Scrolls when I first encountered it. It was just I played Skyrim and I sort of felt that I was being put on this quest treadmill. So it's like, you run into someone, they're like, oh, the dragons are coming back and it's the end of the world. And then like a couple minutes later, somebody's like, could you deliver my mail for me? And then your quest log is like, deliver so-and-so's mail. It's like, okay, I guess the end of the world's going to wait, for me to deliver the mail. And like, I just completely bounced off of that design originally. But then I played Elder Scrolls Arena, which is the very first game. And it's actually unique in the series because it takes place all over the continent of Tamriel. Obviously as the games got more detailed in terms of their graphics, you have to shrink the scope. But what I found was I would very often sit around in a city to wait for a holiday so I could get a really good deal on a piece of armor or like a weapon. And what would happen is I would normally go to a tavern to try and find a quick bit of work that I could do because I knew that I would miss the holiday if I was traveling, let's say from country to country, or region to region, or even city to city in some cases. But if I could do these side jobs, that would actually be a really good way to make a bit of money while I was waiting for a really good deal on some armor. And then there's also other neat things too, like the magic is quite a bit more it's a little bit more diverse. You can like put up walls and you can levitate, and obviously they had to take those away as the games got a bit more sophisticated, just because like you can't put terrain modification inside of Skyrim. Like that's gonna cause all sorts of headaches. But what I've done, this is on YouTube, so I made the mistake of playing as a Dunmer, and I did the voice from Morrowind, and man, that is a very difficult voice to try and do for 3 hours of broadcast. But yeah, I've actually played as the same character in that voice from Arena to the end of Oblivion, and I actually really like the Elder Scrolls now. And I have, in fact, every single book that I have found in that game, I have read. And so despite the fact I did not care for Skyrim the first time I played it, I am reasonably well versed in the lore of Nirn. In fact, I know that the world... this is... So somebody who knew me when I did not care that much for Skyrim... told me it, and they said, the world of Tamriel, and I'm like, I think you mean the world of Nirn. It's like, no, the world's called Tamriel. It's like, the continent is called Tamriel, the world is called Nirn. And the look of murder that they gave me, knowing I was being that pedantic on something that they knew I didn't like at the time or before, was worth it. But no, you're right. There is a lot that's written for it, and it's good fun. The one thing is that there's not as much mystery in the Elder Scrolls lore. Like it does tend to have a lot that they just sort of explain. There are some interesting ones. So there's like the biography of Berenzia, and then there's the real Berenzia, and sort of the question as to whether or not which account is more truthful. And there's a little bit of that in Cultist Simulator as well. But I definitely feel that the secret histories have a lot of sort of unresolved ambiguities, to borrow the name of the lore for secret histories in Cultist Simulator. But those, I really feel like that's where a lot of the excitement for this setting lies, because there's just enough for you to sort of grasp onto. And as we saw, in answering Vesper's question, part of this game is actually resolving these things for yourself. And that will actually have some mechanical implications, either in terms of the elements of the soul that you get, or perhaps other factors related to this journal. So it's a feature I like about it. But again, it's a little bit like when people say, oh, I don't play Civ anymore, I've moved on to the more advanced things like Paradox. Like, Paradox games aren't really more advanced than Civilization. They're just a different kind of game. And likewise, I don't mean to suggest that, oh, the Secret Histories fantasy world is much more interesting than the Bethesda fantasy world. No, they're both really interesting worlds that are very well developed, and they're a lot of fun to run around in. It's just really more of a question of what flavor you feel like, rather than one being better than the other. Yeah, no, I agree completely. Especially the Dwemer, I think. That's a fun one to carry on with, because I didn't think the Dwemer existed at all, and then I ran into one, and I think Morrowind, and I'm like, oh, well, that completely changes my understanding of what's going on. So you're absolutely right. There's definitely there's depths to pull out if you're willing to look for it. All right. Let's read the Sevenfold Slaying of the Seven Coiled, seeing as we're there's a theme going on here. So that one is in Fusine. I've already mastered this, but I could reread it and perhaps recall a memory. And then I'm pretty sure I want to do the Hissing Key, because that one is talking about the Mother of Ants. I actually also played the card. I'm not a big card game guy, except in the case of like Cobalt Core and like the Secret History games are card driven, but they're definitely not card games in the same way that a lot of other games are. But I did rather like Elder Scrolls Legends, which is the more traditional kind of trading card game that they did. The thing is just I sort of feel like it's a crowded space, and so if you're not Hearthstone, it's kind of hard to make your mark. So okay, Enduring Reflections are persistent. So with Keeper level Rose, an Enduring Reflection can give rise to visions of wilder possibilities. I don't have an element of the soul to throw at this right now. I can try turning this into a Horizon site, but obviously we've already got the higher level one from Preliminal Meter, which was the recipe that we were exploring. Let's just run through the tavern so that I can read the other book. And then I think maybe the last little bit we'll catch up. So I've got 2 chairs, the key hooks, the dartboard, and the loyal dog. A tarot for Elder Scrolls? I did not know that. I know there's a tarot for Secret Histories. I actually have it the other side of the room. I know absolutely nothing about the tarot, but I have the cards. There's also the Lucid Tarot coloring book, also due 2024. Okay, I'm going to leave the book aside just so that we can get the Hissing Key read, and then we'll read them side by side. I've already mastered this, but I could reread it and perhaps recall a memory. Actually, I guess, Kree, you have the tarot as well, because you have the lady afterwards, right? Not to put you on the spot. Chandelar was your first and still your favorite card video. Oh, nearly a lot. You're talking about the Sid Meier one, right? Did we talk about this? About the actress who was in the tutorial? I did not realize it was called Chandelar, though. I thought it was just called Magic the Gathering. Okay, so here's okay. So first of all, how many people in chat know that Sid Meier actually made a Magic the Gathering digital card game? Nearly Logical did. Excellent. Okay, it is a very good one. So I know about it more from reputation than anything, and I'd really love it if like GOG or something like that picked it up. But in Nearly Logical, we'll probably be able to clarify what's like where I'm right or wrong on this. But like the idea behind this, I think, is a really good one, and I think the closest I've ever seen to someone recreating this is CD Projekt Red with The Witcher Thronebreaker. But even then, they didn't really follow through the way that the Sid Meier game did. I'll call it the Microprose game, because obviously more than Sid Meier worked on it. But the idea here is that you're sort of the same wizard that you would be when you're playing the card game. Yeah, this Cultist Simulator is wonderful. It's the same musician, Mary Beth Solomon of Mickey Bar Productions, based in Toronto, my beloved homeland of Canada, although I don't live in Toronto. And Book of Hours is just a cut above. When we get to winter, there is a piece that's a particular favorite of mine called Subtle Old Soldier. So the soundtrack is still forthcoming, but when it comes out, that is going to get some very heavy play. But yeah, so the Microprose Magic the Gathering has the same idea. You know, you're a wizard, and the cards represent the spells that you know. But one of the things that they did with that game was that you would travel on sort of this overworld. So you would occasionally run into sort of an enemy, but you would also go into sort of these caves and dungeons to try and get the more powerful cards. Now, I imagine there's probably Wizards of the Coast saying, look, we have a physical product that we want to sell, which is based on the rarity of certain cards and the ability to build certain decks. You can't just like put all the cards in and let people build whatever deck they want. I would almost be certain, because if you notice, it took a really long time for like a full realization of Magic to wind up as a digital card game. But I don't know for sure if that's what it was. But there is something really interesting of this idea, right, of you being sort of this journeying wizard, and the battles that you fight, you know, you put up the ante or whatever, or you're specifically going into a dungeon to get a certain type of card. I think that's a really interesting idea for a Magic game. But the most interesting part about it is that it's a video game, right? And Magic was popular, but you can't just rely on everybody understanding the game, even if the whole point of Magic is basically it's a game where all of the rules are written on the cards. So they have video tutorials, and there are two actors in the tutorial for two wizards. One of the actors is Rhea Seehorn, which if you have watched Better Call Saul, she plays Kim Wexler. So this is somebody who has actually gone on to a rather, decent film career. So if you want to watch Kim Wexler in a wizard costume explaining Magic the Gathering to you, you can find that online. Her co-host, the other wizard, is, I don't know any movies or things that he's been in, but I did recognize his voice and I checked it out, and he voice acts CEO Nobutake Morgan of Morgan Industries from the excellent Firaxis game, Alpha Centauri, the Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, the first of the science fiction Civilization games, although not officially a Civilization game due to the... a 90s full motion video wizard costume, no less. So how's that for a bit of arcane gaming trivia for you? It's those videos are positively magical. I highly recommend you check them out if you know who Rhea Seehorn is, or you just want to see what old Magic games are like. And again, I would genuinely be happy if they brought that Magic game to to back to PC, like go through DOSBox or something like that, because I thought it was actually, the bit I played was very good, and I actually think the format would still work. I don't think it worked very well in Thronebreaker, but I think it's because they didn't commit to the bit. It was still kind of on rails, and you would usually, like, there were interesting puzzles, right? Like, you've got this fight with a manticore and things like that in Thronebreaker, but I think giving someone the freedom to sort of go around and explore the world and try and, like, build up the deck that they have by going into dangerous places and you know, battling them, like, it really does line up with the fantasy underneath the card game, right? That you are a wizard and that you are growing your capabilities and that you need to go into dangerous places in order to gain that knowledge. It's a little bit like Cultist Simulator and Book of Hours, for that matter. Confirmed, you do have the tarot. Well, now, Takri, you got to tell us. Do you know how the tarot works? Can you tell us what the cards mean? Because I sure don't. Randomly generated open world. I did not know that it was randomly generated open world RPG. That is even cooler. Sid Meier's a really, really good game designer. The Sevenfold Slaying of the Seven Coiled, an account of the destruction of the primeval hour, a god who was stone. There are 12 verses. In the first, an ascendant hour, identified as the Scarred One, enumerates his justifications for destroying the Seven Coiled, its appetites, its growth, its enmity to humanity. In the second, a priestess puts out his eyes and scars his skin to protect him against the Seven Coiled's magics. In each of the next 7 verses, he destroys one aspect of the Seven Coiled. In the 10th verse, the Scarred One bathes his priestess patron in the blood of the Seven Coiled to lend her power. In the 11th, they assault the temple behind the world, entering it by force. In the 12th, they swear a tripartite oath to protect their ancestors, their descendants, and themselves. I have not played the original Sid Meier's Pirates, but I have played the PC update both on iPad, which is sadly no longer available, and I do have a PC version of it as well. I think that's actually a very well done game. I think it still holds up. It is a little more fitting for me to put like all of the Hours and Mance's stuff up here, but I also think some of these are some of the coolest books. So I do like that the 3 aspects that I like the most do have sort of these alignments with each other, or at the very least like my secondary interests of Edge and Knock have sort of this alignment in terms of the destruction of the Seven Coiled, the Mother of Ants and the Colonel. It's not really that kind of tarot, just cards with art for the Hours. Yeah, I mean, I do think there are correspondences, so I seem to recall the Colonel is the Chariot, and I think Moth would be the Fool? But yeah, no, Sid Meier's Pirates is wonderful. All right, The Hissing Key, an account of the ascent of the hour called the Mother of Ants by the Bossk scholar Mek of the Theban branch of the House of Leith. Mek is not sympathetic to the Mother of Ants, who he calls the Milk Thief. He reviles her for her part in the death of the Seven Coils, which he presents as a treacherous conspiracy. The Milk Thief conspires with the Legion Echidna and the hour-to-be called Chiliarch, now more generally rendered as Colonel, to unseam the Seven Coils with feathers and drown her in salt. The Colonel thus ascends to hour status. The jealous Milk Thief, once the Colonel's priestess, seduces Echidna into lending her the Hissing Key to enter the Mansis through the Savage Door, beginning her own ascent to name and ultimately hour. Well, there we go. Now I guess we've decided that the Moth is the oldest of the hours, living hours. Okay, I want to read that again. An account of the ascent of the hour called the Mother of Ants by the Bossk scholar Mek of the Theban branch of the House of Leith. Mek is not sympathetic to the Mother of Ants, who he calls the Milk Thief. He reviles her for her part in the death of the Seven Coils, which he presents as a treacherous conspiracy. The Milk Thief conspires with the Legion Echidna and the hour-to-be called Chiliarch, now more generally rendered as Colonel, to unseam the Seven Coils with feathers and drown her in salt. The colonel thus ascends to our status. The jealous milk thief, once the colonel's priestess, seduces Echidna into lending her the hissing key to enter the mantis through the savage door, beginning her own ascent to name and ultimately our. Okay, so I'm trying to work out some of the differences between the two accounts here, but I'm satisfied with what I got there. In the tabletop RPG, you set up a few during play. When they're supposed to be relevant, you look at the cards and make stuff up based on the art. If you don't even have to know anything about them, and they don't include any info about them. Well, actually, the interesting one is the playing card deck that they sell, which was the first one that I got, actually has some instructions for cartomancy, but using a standard playing deck. I'm assuming at this point the kind of the rules for reading tarot are sort of available widely. But I know you weren't a huge fan of Lady After. That might be stronger than you intend, but like I know it was different from what you were expecting, I think would be fair to say. So I know there's a bit of difference between the instructions and what you wanted. All right, so the severe chair, unfussy marsh green upholstery. Investigate the object. I'm going to have to wrap up reasonably soon because I do need to catch up on a few things before the end, but tarot and playing cards are similar enough. You're just missing the major arcana. Yeah, it's the 78 is the tarot? I can never remember. I wanted to I was doing some. I've been looking into a bunch of different methods of random number generation for a while and trying to map them to certain distributions for other things in the world. So like so I was always interested in the fact that like RPG dice are modeled after the Platonic solids, and it turns out that was actually a conscious choice. So it's perfectly feasible, and a lot of games do just use six-sided die. For dice for their systems, but apparently it was a conscious choice on the part of the people who made D&D to make dice based off of the Platonic solids. So it wasn't even necessarily that you could express the numbers in a better way. I think they just wanted to do it that way. So you want to say 72%? Well, you know what? We'll find out now. This is why God invented Wikipedia. Why does it not say it here? $78 cards. Okay. So 52 in a standard one, right? So that, I guess, implies 20. I thought it was 22 arcana. Hang on. The Mare in the Tree. I didn't realize the Mare in the Tree was... I always thought there was just one of the Nowhere Hours in the deck. I'm going to have to look at that again. There's Lady Afterward is an adventure, and the book is thicker than the rules for it. They call the system Secret Histories. Your favorite is random distribution method is salted hash, mostly because it's the one that you have to use the most. Well, this was it. Like one of the origins for this interest was just trying to if you want, there's any number of libraries that you can get to generate colored noise, but I'm like, it would be kind of interesting to see if I can generate that on my own, because I found a MATLAB program that did it. But most of the time I find when people give you a random number generator, like for the colored noise, it'll usually be like 1 or 2 dimensions. And I'm like, well, if I really understand this, I should be able to do like, n dimensional noise, right? And so I built up on that. Now, again, there's no practical use for it. I'm just going to use somebody else's implementation because they're a better programmer than I am. But from there, it was sort of like, okay, well, I'm doing this digitally now, but what if I were to do something like a tabletop game? And it doesn't even have to be an RPG, but like, let's say it was a board game. If I wanted to represent something from the world, I understand statistical distributions very well, but what would I need to do to be able to turn that into die rolls? And then on top of that, to say, okay, well, you can probably give me enough dice and I can probably approximate a distribution for you. But then the question would be, well, how do you do this with a number of dice that people would be willing to roll? Because obviously, if you expect people to roll like 25 d6s and then add them up and then like take the square root, like that's a lot to ask of someone. So then what you do is you can say, okay, so what is the most elegant way of solving this while still roughly getting the distribution that you're working for? So Beachcomber, Flower Maker, and the Crown Growth. I don't know how much to think about. Well, I don't think Flower Maker is a god from nowhere, because I think there's the reference that Bancroft is introduced to the ways of the Flower Maker by the Rose Witch Fiona Ayrshire. But the crown growth is definitely a nowhere hour, and the Beachcomber I think is an aviform. Grail or Lantern, or Grail and Lantern, I would imagine, because I would be surprised if Bancroft wasn't Lantern oriented. But I do know that the Flower Maker comes up in the Grail Apostle run. And again, the hours are definitely not fixed to a single principle, so I would make a guess that the Flower Maker is probably Grail Lantern. But I couldn't actually pin that down. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, and to be honest, the Bancroft connection is not a strong one. Like, it's not like it's not like that's the one that's not the thing I would sort of pin it on. But there's something that makes me believe fairly strongly that the Flower Maker is Grail, Grail and Lantern, and not just Grail. But I could be wrong. Definitely has a Grail side, though. This chair is innocent of chairly secrets. Okay, so it's night, but we will be able to check out one more item in the room. So the staff armchair. The art for it has a bowl of flowers. That's kind of Graily, right? Oh yes, definitely. I mean, I suppose we could try consulting the Secret Histories wiki, but then I guess the question would be, where do we know that the Secret Histories wiki, how do we know it's right? Usually they're pretty good at citing their sources, but I've tried to resist the urge to read it so that I can sort of form my own view. I want to at least get the network analysis for Book of Hours done before I start plumbing the depths of that, just because I'm stubborn and I really like reading stuff for myself. The staff armchair, I love this description, by the way, polished by the posteriors of dozens of loafing prison guards. For a great many years, this chair sat below a dartboard. The leather is pocked with marks of occasional misses, or just possibly assassination attempts. you've explored that wiki multiple times and have retained very little. There is actually some sort of science behind that, because like part of the retention is that the actual struggle of having to remember something or having to sort of work at getting a certain type of knowledge is actually one of the ways that you can enhance it's one of the ways you can achieve and enhance retention. So this is one of the reasons why, again, I do not want to imply at all that it is a bad thing to check out that Secret Histories wiki, or that somehow by like talking with other people you are having a lesser experience. But because for me, so much of the things that I value tend to come from spending the time and sort of wrestling with it and working on it. It's one of these cases where I really wanted to give myself a fair shake before I sort of plumb the depths of the wiki. I mean, at that point, maybe hopefully I would be contributing to it. So I believe the book that I got that from, I think it might actually be called Make It Stick, and I got Make It Stick recommended to me from a book called Range by David Epstein. But I enjoyed both. I preferred Range, but yeah, I mean, it makes sense, because like in the end, number one, I think there's something to be said in terms of where creative ideas come from, in terms of sort of struggling with the idea and then just sort of letting your brain sort of work on it in the background. But I think there's just something about that process, right? Like one of the examples that they gave was working on the problem and potentially getting it wrong is not actually a bad thing, provided that you are given the correct answer, like you are guided towards the right answer. But the process of actually trying to do the work is one of the things that matters there. And again, if you are practicing, so like I'm trying to teach myself piano again. So I have the benefit of education in that before. But one of the things I really need to worry about is particularly with things like the timing, like the tempo. If I flub a note and it sort of roughly sounds right, I do actually need to make sure that I stop and I correct. And I mean, one thing I can do if it gets to sufficiently complicated music that I'm not able to sight read it, what I can do is I can just sort of paint that out in a music program and sort of know what it's supposed to sound like when you have a computer, like keeping the tempo and the doing the pitch perfect notes and all of that. But again, the reason why I do it the way that I do it is if I can train myself to detect where I've gone wrong, well, in the end, I'm going to be a better piano player, or at the very least, I'll try and recapture some of what I lost by putting in that effort and working through. But the important part on that is to actually identify where I have gone wrong, because if I don't identify where I've gone wrong, what I then do is I just practice the wrong way, and at that point I remain in error. That's, yes, a good point, Nearly Logical. I think you're spot on with that. That's actually as old as, here's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap up Book of Hours today, but I will share one. We're going to go Plato on this. So the Book of Mask, Athena Vanna's work on the rogue hour called the Vagabond, who is also known as the Laughing Thrush, the Centipede, the Pilgrim, by many other names, or as Vanna put it, or as Vanna has it, masks. Oriflammes thanks you for your custom. So we've got lots to do. We will be back to this on Friday. We are... Holy crap, I am running out of time. We'll be back Friday with Book of Hours. On Wednesday, we are going to be playing the very enjoyable Cobalt Core by Brace Yourself Publishing and developed by Rocket Rat Games. But whatever reminded me of something from my favorite dialogue, Phaedrus. So I am going to take a really quick second to get my collected works, because by God, we're a literary group here. Yeah, just give me a quick second, because I'm already later than I wanted to be, but I do want to I do want to do this, so just bear with me a second. We'll have a little reading, and then we'll find somebody to host tonight. So I have the book. I just need to find the passage. It's not the shortest dialogue. All right, found it. So sorry about the wait for that. So for those of you who happen to have a copy of Phaedrus or the collected works of Plato, and frankly, who doesn't? Stephanus' number is 274C. So this is Socrates. I can tell you what I've heard the ancients said, though they alone know the truth. However, if we could discover that ourselves, would we still care about the speculations of other people? Phaedrus, that's a silly question. Still, tell me what you've heard. Socrates, well, this is what I've heard. Among the ancient gods of Naucratis, footnote here, Naucratis was a Greek trading colony in Egypt. The story that follows is probably an invention of Plato's, in which he reworks elements from Egyptian and Greek mythology. In Egypt, there was one whom the bird called the ibis is sacred. The name of that divinity was Thuth. As footnote here, Thuth, or Thoth, is the Egyptian god of writing, measuring, and calculation. The Greeks identified Thoth with Hermes, perhaps because of his role in weighing the soul. Thoth figures in a related story about the alphabet. And it was he who first discovered number and calculation, geometry, and astronomy, as well as the games of checkers and dice, and above all else, writing. Now the kings of all Egypt at that time was Thamus, who lived in the great city in the upper region that the Greeks called Egyptian Thebes. Thamus they call Ammon. Thuth came to exhibit his arts to him and urged him to disseminate them to all the Egyptians. Thamus asked him about the usefulness of each art, and while Thuth was explaining it, Thamus praised him for whatever he thought was right in his explanations and criticized him for whatever he thought was wrong. The story goes that Thamus said much to Thuth, both for and against each art, which it would take too long to repeat. But when they came to writing, Thuth said, "O king, here is something that, once learned, will make the Egyptians wiser and will improve their memory. I have discovered a potion for memory and for wisdom." Thamus, however, replied, "O most expert Thuth, one man can give birth to the elements of an art, but only another can judge how they can benefit or harm those who will use them. And now, since you are the father of writing, your affection for it has made you describe its effects as the opposite of what they really are. In fact, you will introduce forgetfulness into the soul of those who learn it. They will not practice using their memory because they will put their trust in writing, which is external and depends on signs that belong to others, instead of trying to remember from the inside completely on their own. You have not discovered a potion for remembering, but for reminding. You provide your students with the appearance of wisdom, not with its reality. Your invention will enable them to hear many things without being properly taught, and they will imagine that they have come to know much, while for the most part they will know nothing. And they will be difficult to get along with, since they will merely appear to be wise instead of really being so." And then I do want to give the follow-up here. Phaedrus, "Socrates, you're very good at making up stories from Egypt or wherever else you want. But, yeah, that says, frankly, who doesn't have a copy of Plato is the kind of thing I'm here for, especially when I don't." I picked this up because I had a very good classics professor at UBC, and I never took his Plato course, but I really enjoyed the class I did take with him, and I did find a copy of Plato Collected Works edited by John M. Cooper. This is by Hackett Publishing. This is a good edition, which I like quite a bit, so that was the one I was reading out of. But to whatever's... wait till he finds out about Google. So, there's another way you might have found out about this passage, which was, I think it was Nicholas Carr. He wrote an essay for The Atlantic called "Is Google Making Us Stupid?", which obviously got exactly the reaction you think it did. But he did expand that book to a book called The Shallows, and he does actually acknowledge Phaedrus and the fact that this is a very old criticism. And then, of course, he goes on to say, "But I really think it's real this time." But to whatever's point before, when he says, "I remember hearing that instant access to information has made it so that people don't remember things as much, because before the internet they had to go and research, which helped cement the memory." It actually goes as far as ancient Greece, where you have Plato writing in the mouth of Socrates this ancient, completely made-up myth about Thoth presenting the art of writing, and being told that it is in fact a potion of forgetfulness that only provides the illusion of wisdom. So I figured that was a fun one to wrap up the stream with. But I need to wrap up for tonight. You have all been very wonderful, and thank you, all of you. We've actually had a bunch of streamers stop by, which I was very happy for. So let me say a special thank you again to Lord Gloom, to Vesper Fortune VT, to Selphea. And of course, if you are a broadcaster and I didn't mention you before, I apologize. Definitely feel free to let me know. But I appreciate you all hanging out and, I don't know, giving me some conversation material, if nothing else. But let's find somebody to host tonight. Hopefully we've got somebody playing Book of Hours. If not, we've got a few people that we can... Oh, you know what? Okay. I feared it was too late, but at least I got a fun fact. I'm so sorry, Beth, kind of, sort of. I've actually been really trying to lock in my bedtimes. So I actually have a whole bunch of streamers I would like to shout out for you. We are going to host Dendrian, but I did want to point out that Jessie in the Stars, she has been growing your channel. She just got her affiliate marker. I know she's got a great love of The Legend of Zelda. We've got, well, I'm not quite done yet because I got a couple of other shout outs to do. I'm going to shout out Dendrian, and this will actually take a while, so I'm also going to do shout out for Outworld here. Otherwise, if I have to wait for this timer each time. Outworld's currently doing retro. I can't recall exactly which one he was doing. I think it's Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. He's a partnered streamer and based in Australia. He's actually been working on trying to extract himself from doing Mortal Kombat the whole time. We've got the excellent Dendrian, who I would have been hosting tonight, save for the fact... Oh, I need to wait 59 seconds before giving another shout out. All right, well, never mind. We've got Dendrian doing Against the Storm. He plays this game at a very high level, and that game actually got a 1.0 release recently, but I don't want to talk my way out of the person I do want to host, which is Prosciutto Fist. I found Prosciutto Fist playing Book of Hours, so I feel like this is probably the best bet. She also happens to have the smallest number of people viewing her, so I would love it if you folks would stick around. But she is currently playing Cult of the Lamb. She's an absolute sweetheart. It's a lot of fun to hang out with her. She's been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 recently. Has been doing some Cult of the Lamb, and I believe will be returning to Book of Hours at some point before too long. So I'd love it if you would all come along, treat her as well as you've treated me, if not better, and enjoy a nice time with the ham-fisted Cult of the Lamb. Anyways, I will see some of you Wednesday for Cobalt Core, some of you Friday for more Book of Hours, and because there are so many excellent streamers in here, I am sure I will see all of you in your own channels. Have a lovely evening. Until next time.
Oh, thank you for the raid, System Chalk. Sorry I'm slouching. I just lost in knuckle bones. Hello, Nearly Logical. How are you? Hello, everybody. I'm Pro. We're playing Cult of the Lamb. How was your stream? Are you playing Book of Hours? Raid. Hello, Vesper Fortune VT. What's your first impression? Hello, whatever. Lots of numbers.